The First Evolution. Prologue, Withering Summer. Volume 1, Dead End. The dusk of the 19 years old. In the early 90s. In the poster on the wall of the beauty shop on the street, Aaron Kwok, who was wearing a big red bat shirt, was smiling. The radio at the shop by the roadside was playing the new song of Andy Lau, Hungry Wolf Legend. The street was bustling with people. The food stalls exuded the mixed fragrance of hot and sour powder and deep-fried mochi. The honking noise and people shouting came one after another. On the side of the tile-roofed house was a red banner. It was written with Year of the Monkey, Happy New Year. However, today, people's focus was still on a piece of news in the second edition of XX Business Daily. The title of this news directly got the attention of countless people. To use future buzzwords, it was on the hot search. The title of the subject turned out to be 6 words, Virgin gives birth to a baby. Fortunately, the editor still didn't completely abandon his own ethics. He honestly explained the full story in the following paragraph. It was a young girl who neither went swimming nor spent the night outside. At first, she felt that her period was disordered, but she didn't put attention to it. She went into a coma during the class several times, but no problem could be found after doing a medical check on her head. Therefore, she was asked to rest at home. As a result, one night, her mother discovered that the girl turned on the refrigerator to eat raw meat, and her belly began to grow rapidly. Then, her mother began to think about pregnancy. When she went to the hospital for examination, she even found that her daughter was still a virgin. Here is the attachment of the interview with the director of gynecology of the Grade A hospital. People who saw this report reacted differently. Some were surprised, some scoffed that it must be the girl having improper conduct, so she bribed the doctor to lie for her, and some were directly reprimanding the editor for making up a ridiculous story that defiled the reputation of a dignified provincial newspaper. But what no one knew that a week later, the reporter responsible for reporting the incident committed suicide in the middle of the night without warning. A month later, the gynecological director who was interviewed was accidentally stabbed by a needle during the operation, causing her to die of a serious infection. Before she died, she had told people inadvertently that this girl was very evil. She didn't cry or make trouble when she gave birth, she just smiled strangely throughout the whole process. The key was that the thing that was born was even more strange. It turns out to be the girl who was involved was aging as if she had withered this summer, and she finally disappeared mysteriously. 6 months later, a baby was placed at the entrance of the local orphanage. The baby's swaddle had 10,000 yuan in it. There was a note with only 3 characters written on it which should be the baby's name. Fang Linian. Chapter 1, Evil on Earth. 19 years later. Late autumn. Cold rain continued all day. A young man sat in the coffee shop in a daze, staring at the busy and bustling city outside the window. Although there was warm heat in his palm holding the cup, his heart was cold. Why? Because of the hospital checklist in his arms. Although the doctor was evasive when explaining the checklist and used many words such as suspect, probably, not ruled out and so on, Fang Linian still smelled a very ominous smell from it. So, he then dialed the phone and called a client who had medical skills. He didn't say that it was his own checklist, but his friend. After he read the contents of the checklist, the client said casually, "Advanced lung cancer, it basically can't be treated." Then, his mind went blank for more than half an hour, then he stood on the side of the road in a daze. He didn't even without knowing how to get home in the end. When he regained his thought, he found that he had been sitting in front of the bed. His hands were cold, and his heart was also at a loss. He blankly poured himself a glass of water and drank it bit by bit, then he gradually recovered his senses. Suddenly, the strength of his body seemed to be drained all of a sudden. He fell to the ground. He tightly covered his face with both hands, making a whimpering sound. "I don't want to die. I'm only 19 years old." For Fang Linian, this late autumn November was the longest month in his life. First, the relative who lived with him. Right after the funeral, he was diagnosed with advanced lung cancer. Although Fang Linian had suffered from setbacks since he was a child, so his nerves had been strengthened enough, but he still collapsed directly in the face of such continuous heavy traumas. He stayed in a rented house for 2 days before getting over it, but in the face of the great horror between life and death, he would still get out of control intermittently. But who was not like this, drifting silently in the distance, occasionally screaming bitterly, crying out into the sky, and finally cooling down, numbly gritting teeth and struggling in this indifferent world. Cold eyes, cold nights, Cold rain, cold encounters. During this month, Fang Linian had suffered too many contemptuous eyes, and he was under too much pressure. The fact that he didn't completely collapse was already proof of his strong mentality. The world was too harsh to him. However, he still held on like a tenacious cockroach. After a while, Fang Linian stood up again, wiped away the tears from the corner of his eyes, took a few deep breaths, and finally adjusted his mental state again. He coughed a few times and frowned, obviously enduring the pain. After searching at home, he found half of a beef jerky that was somewhat moistured. Although Fang Linian didn't have any appetite at all, he still forced himself to eat this leftover beef jerky bit by bit. If someone was nearby, he would definitely feel that Fang Linian, who tore apart the food with his teeth, looked like a wolf. The hungry wolf was driven to a dead end in the blizzard, but it still bared its fangs and fluffed up. Wild and dangerous. In Fang Linian's heart, he always remembered one sentence in his mind. Those things that can't kill us will only make us stronger. After eating, Fang Linian took out his mobile phone and looked at it. He found that he had received a certain amount of money. Just as he wanted to go out, an intense cough struck him, causing him to support against the wall. He felt like his internal organs were being coughed out. After a while, Fang Linian straightened up while gasping. The corner of his mouth already had blood flowing out, and the palm covering his mouth was even more bloody. He took a piece of paper to wipe the blood off, gave himself a medicine, then walked out the door weakly. The supermarket at the corner of the street was still open, but it was raining lightly. The cold rain, that was mixed with cold wind, could bring a chill down people's spines. No matter whether the person was holding an umbrella or had his head or neck down, the people were running hurriedly. Because this road was relatively remote, the cameras and electronic eyes installed had long been damaged, and the road was seriously damaged as well. In addition, it was a slum. Because there was no surveillance, many overloaded trucks and slag trucks were speeding from this road unscrupulously, making loud rumbling noises. They were basically on a rampage. Fang Linian walked on the road with an indifferent expression. He arrived at the supermarket 5 minutes later and started shopping. A box of instant noodle bowls. Fine dried noodles, sales promotion, 10 caddies. 1 bag of beef jerky, nutrition supplement. 1 packet of broad bean paste, noodle seasoning. It can be seen that Fang Linian bought these things to be able to eat. Why did he save so much? It was because he had treated Uncle Su, who adopted him, and borrowed a lot of foreign debts during funerals. Add up to hundreds of thousands. Although Fang Linian suffered a lot of hardship in his childhood and adolescence, he had a hostile spirit in his mind, but when his outlook on life was formed, he was deeply influenced by the honest and sincere Uncle Su. Therefore, he has an obsession in his heart at this time. Even if he was terminally ill, he must pay off his debts before death. In addition, the boss whom Fang Linian met before was a stingy man. This was why he saved so much. After quickly buying everything needed, Fang Linian was going to pay the bill at the cashier. But at this time, he suddenly felt a little stomach ache, so he went to the supermarket's toilet. After coming out of the toilet, he naturally washed his hands on the wash basin outside. Normally, there was a mirror directly opposite the wash basin which was convenient for customers to take care of their appearance. A pale light was projected from above, and there was no one on the sink. After Fang Linian washed his hands, he habitually patted his face with cold water to refresh himself. This was a habit he had during working in the garage for several years. However, when he raised his head and looked into the opposite mirror, he suddenly felt cold all over. An indescribable feeling of fear instantly enveloped his whole body. It turned out that Fang Linian did not see his face in the mirror. The place that was supposed to be a mirror was actually shrouded in a dense black cloud vortex. Not only that, a palm full of scars and blood was stretched out from the vortex. It grabbed Fang Linian's neck and forcibly pulled him forward. Fang Linian only felt that there was a fierce and intense pain from the place he was caught on his neck as if he was branded by a soldering iron. He couldn't gather any strength at all, or to be precise, the power he possessed had no ability to resist the bloody palm. Just when Fang Linian's face was about to hit the black cloud vortex, he suddenly noticed a crazy bloody eyeball appeared in the vortex. The eyeball seemed to be dug out from the eye socket. There were even some remnants of scarlet tissue around the eyeball. The eyeball was bloodshot. The deep gaze seemed to have a huge attraction. As Fang Linian's eyes looked into it, he immediately felt extremely dizzy, then he just lost his consciousness. After a long time, Fang Linian felt a violent sharp pain in his chest, and his whole body convulsed. He then recovered from the dizziness. Then he found that he was still standing in front of the wash basin. He gasped for a few times, swallowed a mouthful of saliva, and looked around, only to find that there was no bloody scarred palm, no dense black cloud vortex, and no bloodshot eyes. There was only a quiet toilet, the sound of water dripping from the faucet, and the pale light that was gently projected from above. He maintained his hands propping up from the wash basin, and he looked into the mirror. It was as if he had a hallucination. Fang Linian stayed in confusion for a while, then he walked out the door and wanted to pay the bill at the cashier. But when he walked out of the washroom, he was stunned because he saw that the staff here had begun to mop and clean the shelves. This was an ordinary thing, but it meant that it was almost 9:30 p.m. Because the supermarket closed at 10 p.m., in order to get off work on time, these staff must clean up in advance. I clearly remember that I left at 7:30 p.m. Because when I left, the TV in the canteen at the entrance was playing CCAV weather forecast. It was only 20 minutes walking distance from my home to the supermarket, and I never strolled for long in the supermarket. I just take whatever that is on the list. Then, I'm in the toilet. For nearly an hour and a half. Such a strange thing suddenly sent a chill down Fang Linian's spine immediately. This is impossible. If I really stood with my hands supporting the sink for an hour and a half, then the people in the supermarket would have come to check it out. At least, I wouldn't remain the same until now. What happened in this hour and a half? Chapter 2, The Impact of That Crush. With a lot of doubts, Fang Linian lifted the shopping basket and put it in front of the cashier. After scanning the QR code to pay, he picked up the goods and left. When he got out from the entrance, the scanner next to the entrance was beeping. Fang Linian was a little at a loss. A security guard next to him had already stood by the door very skillfully, held his shoulders and said with an indifferent smile. "Be honest, take out the things." The fat auntie next to him jumped up like she was getting a shot of stimulant. "Aya haha! You little punk dares to steal things." Fang Linian only felt resentful at this time. He said with a flush. "I didn't." Cough cough cough. When he got excited, he bent down and coughed violently. The security guard thought he was playing tricks, then he would escape if there was a chance. It happened before, and it even caused his salary to be deducted for half a month. Therefore, he just impolitely pulled Fang Linian, who had almost collapsed, inside while shouting for help. The fat auntie trot over in excitement, even the fat on her face was trembling. When she got close, she lifted her arm, wanting to slap Fang Linian fiercely. But in the next second, a terrifying thing happened. There was a deep roar from the street. This sound was familiar to everyone. It was the hoarse sound of heavy truck engines passing by here frequently. However, amidst the engine noises, there was still a sharp honk. Immediately afterward, a full-load heavy truck that was at least 70 tons was completely out of control. It rushed in with a gust of cold wind and slammed into the supermarket at a speed of over 80 kilometers. This heavy truck rushed by less than 1 meter from Fang Linian at an astonishing high speed. The pillars at the entrance of the supermarket shattered in an instant, the metal frame was softened and deformed like plasticine. After this uncontrollable heavy truck plowed a road mixed with human flesh, concrete and metal at the entrance of the supermarket, it drove another 20 meters. Finally, it hit the 5 floors building behind the supermarket. The exterior wall of this building was made of red bricks, even the wall was not painted. Its age was probably much older than Linian. How could it withstand such a devastation? After shaking twice, it collapsed and buried halfway through the front of the truck. A large cloud of smoke emerged. Everyone who witnessed this tragic scene was so shocked that they couldn't react to it for the first dozen seconds. In the end, they were woken by the painful cry of the injured ones, and they hurriedly went to help. At this time, who would bother about the small matter like the alarm was triggered? Fang Linian of course helped out too. He was so busy that he was sweating profusely. Later, others saw him coughing so badly that even blood came out, only then they persuaded him to rest by the side. After Fang Linian returned home, he was tossing on the bed, but he couldn't fall asleep no matter how. Because the previous 2 facts gave him too much of a shock. The toilet incident was extremely weird, the following car accident that was close at hand even brought fear to him. The shock of facing the crazy rushing slag truck and the cruelty and helplessness of life being destroyed in an instant made Fang Linian deeply felt the impermanence of life and the disillusionment. The details kept playing back in his mind. Suddenly, Fang Linian thought of something terrifying. He immediately had a chill down his spine as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. Because he calculated carefully, if he paid and left normally at that time, and there was no alarm incident by the supermarket machine, then the heavy truck that was out of control would definitely hit him head-on. He took a few deep breaths, calmed his mind, and his thoughts immediately focused on this key point. Why did the supermarket's alarm suddenly trigger? There was a chance of machine false alarms, but the possibility was very small, so it was directly ruled out by Fang Linyan. Then, the biggest possibility is that I really have unscanned products on me. And to verify this is very simple, that is check it right away. First of all, Fang Linyan poured out the products in the supermarket shopping bag, and he started checking. It took only a dozen seconds for him to make sure that there was no omission. Next, it was his body. Fang Linyan habitually inserted his hand into the right trouser pocket first, then he immediately showed a dazed expression. Yes, he actually touched something hard inside, and it was still a square object. After Fang Linyan took it out, he realized that it was a cell phone. Yes, it was Nokia 100 bar phone that was almost obsolete. This thing was basically useless for young people, but because of its loud voice, durability, amazing battery life, and cheap, it is favored by many elderly people. Therefore, it could still be seen selling in the marketplace. Looking at the brand new bar phone in his hand, Fang Linyan was really dumbfounded. He never thought that there would be such a new thing on his body. He remembered clearly that he had not even been close to the mobile phone store, not to mention stealing this phone. What's more, to be honest, Fang Linyan now even used smartphones like Huawei or Oppo. If he wanted to steal, he wouldn't steal such an antique. At this time, Fang Linyan suddenly found that the mobile phone he was holding in his hand was still on. He clicked in with a curious coincidence, and he realized that there were 3 unread text messages in it. The sender of the text messages displayed as unknown. After he opened the text message, his pupils shrank abruptly because he realized that what he saw next was actually extremely strange. You were originally destined to not be able to read this text message. You should know exactly what I'm talking about. Yes, your normal destiny path should end at 9 hours 47 minutes and 32 seconds tonight. The cause of death was a car accident that even your corpse could hardly be found. This kind of antique phone could only allow a limited number of characters in a text message, so the content was cut off here. He had to go to the next message to read the following content, but Fang Linyan didn't rush to read the next message. He felt his heart palpitating quickly, his outlook on life was greatly impacted because he knew very well that every word in this text message was true. At this time, Fang Linyan felt his vision became blurred, knowing that his weak body was simply unbearable due to the violent shocks in his mood, he might pass out in a coma in the next second. So he took a few deep breaths, quickly grabbed a handful of glucose powder and stuffed it directly into his mouth. After that, he closed his eyes and forced his mind to blank out without thinking about anything. As such, he finally recovered gradually. It took more than 10 minutes for Fang Linyan to get over it. After he calmed down, he opened the second text message again. I know you must have a lot of questions in your mind now, but it's not time to tell you the answer. It doesn't feel good to know that you have advanced cancer and you can only wait silently for your own death, right? Have you ever thought about changing this damn fate? After seeing these questions, Fang Linyan suddenly clenched his fist. His whole body trembled violently. Yes, after knowing the bad news, what he thought most was to contend with the damn fate. But after inquiring a lot of information, he discovered that the so-called cancer fighting could really only be described by the words submit to fate. That kind of helplessness and powerlessness were the most desperate to him. In fact, if there really was a throat of fate, Fang Linyan would definitely pounce on it frantically. He would clutch it hard, if he couldn't, he would bite it, if it still didn't work, he would bump with his head. As long as he still had his last breath, he would never give up. Of course. I want. Fang Linyan couldn't help but squeeze out these 4 words from his teeth. He couldn't wait to open the third text message. At this moment, he was like a drowning man who would pounce on the straw that he could reach. Because even the worst result couldn't be worse than it was now, not to mention that this mysterious text message had shown something that was clearly beyond the known science. Compared with the first 2 messages, the third text message was extremely simple. It was with only 1 sentence and a few words. At 12:17 a.m. on the 13th, Huishwan number 5 Pier, a silver box, cannot arrive early or late. Looking at these words, Fang Linyan's face began to become dignified. This was not the hint he wanted. Because there was only time and place, but not the situation that he was going to face. If he stepped into it rashly, the unknown risk in this was really too great. However, in front of such a weird multiple-choice question, he had no choice at all. If he doesn't go, what was waiting for him was death. It was not Fang Linian's style to act rashly, plan before action was his style. Therefore, Fang Linian immediately turned on his mobile phone to check relevant maps and information. He soon discovered that Huishuan No. 5 Pier had been abandoned for several years. It was about 50 to 60 kilometers away from the city. It was very remote. Even the nearest highway was almost 2 kilometers, and the connection between the pier and the highway was a dirt road. After thinking for a while, he went directly to an internet cafe because only a computer could display satellite pictures and street views. However, when Fang Linian wanted to retrieve the pictures for reference, he encountered error 404. He sighed regretfully. He decided to go for a distant field survey tomorrow. Fortunately, there were almost 2 days of buffer time before 12:17 am on the 13th. Fang Linian had plenty of time to investigate all this. Chapter 3, Changes. The next day. Night fell. Fang Linian sat in the internet cafe a little uneasily. The environment of the internet cafe was very poor. There were smokers and people shouting everywhere. Fang Linian felt very uncomfortable. But this was the only internet cafe in Nida town, so the business was still very good. Why was Fang Linian in the internet cafe in Nida town? It was because this was the nearest town to the Huishuan No. 5 Pier. The text message clearly wrote, at 12:17 am on the 13th, Huishuan No. 5 Pier, cannot go early or late. Fang Linian considered that his body was weak and could not perform vigorous exercises such as running. So after careful inspection and calculations, he would set off at 11:30 p.m. on the 12th and rode an electric bicycle to Huishuan No. 5 Pier. In this case, he could reach the road outside Huishuan No. 5 Pier at about 12:10 am. It was only 400 to 500 meters away from the Huishuan No. 5 Pier. After waiting there for about 5 minutes, he could make sure to arrive at 12:17 am on time. As for the electric bicycle, of course Fang Linian rode it by himself. Before he came, he specially examined and repaired this second-hand electric bicycle. After coming to Nida town, he also specially charged it to ensure that there would be no mechanical failure, etc. The electric bicycle was placed where the light could shine from the entrance of the internet cafe, and he even let the internet cafe admin specially lock it with an iron chain to prevent it from being stolen. Therefore, Fang Linian had considered every possibility and almost eliminated all possible risks. Now he was really ready for everything, he just had to wait now. As time passed by, Fang Linian was absent-mindedly flipping through the web page in front of him, but his thoughts had drifted to the upcoming event. What will happen on Huishuan No. 5 Pier? Why does the mysterious message ask me not to arrive early or late? How will my destiny be reversed? It was because Fang Linian had been distracted, so he ignored the few delinquents with cold gazes and non-mainstream dresses sitting on the sofa of the internet cafe. Suddenly, Fang Linian felt his mobile phone vibrate, and he suddenly got out of the state of absent-mindedness. He picked up the mobile phone and looked carefully, and he found that the alarm clock he set was ringing. It was already 11:30 p.m. At this time, Fang Linian suddenly felt that his throat became dry. He took 2 deep breaths. According to the plan he had made before, he first took analgesic and cough medicine. This was to prevent him from falling sick at the critical moment, then he drank a can of Red Bull to ensure his energy was enough. Then Fang Linian closed his eyes and directly cleared the distractions in his mind for 10 seconds, took a deep breath, stood up and walked to the counter to check out. When he stood up and settled the bill, several delinquents on the sofa next to him looked at each other and walked into the darkness first. Fang Linian left the internet cafe entrance, then he unchained the bike and rode on it. As he was about to turn on the road ahead, he saw a few stones blocking the road in front of him. The road here was originally pitted, now with these stones blocking, he definitely couldn't ride over. Fang Linian was in a hurry at this time, so he didn't have time to think. He hurriedly stopped the bike and went to move the rocks. Unexpectedly, after he left the electric bicycle, a delinquent rushed out from the corner next to him and went straight to push the electric bicycle. Another 2 delinquents walked out from the shadow. One was holding a flick knife, the other casually grabbed half a brick in his hand, walking straight at Fang Linian. The delinquent with a flick knife was full of hostility. He pointed the knife at Fang Linian and said, "Screw you, what are you looking at? Hand out all the money you have, and don't forget your mobile phone too. Fang Linian only felt cold all over because he had also been at the bottom of society, knowing that these little rascals were the most difficult to deal with. They had simple minds and were very easy to be agitated. If it was a usual day, he would definitely give in on the spot, but he would retaliate slowly afterward. But now how could Fang Linian give in? How dare he give in? For him at this time, giving away money and mobile phone was fine. However, this was a remote place, and it was late at night now. He couldn't even call a taxi. The electric bicycle was the only transportation that decided whether he could get to Huishuan No. 5 pier in time. It also represented the gleam of life that Fang Linian ignited. Therefore, Fang Linian had made a decision in his heart. He put up a panic expression on his face and took out his money and mobile phone in a fluster. The delinquent was hot-headed after seeing the stacks of banknotes. He immediately stretched out to grab it. At this moment, Fang Linian let go of his hand, and the banknotes naturally fell. The delinquent naturally bent down to pick it up. Fang Linian hit his face with his knee. Fang Linian could even clearly feel the snapping sound of the opponent's nose bone deformed under the impact. The delinquent with a flick knife let out a vague painful cry from deep in his throat. He covered his face and rolled on the ground. At this time, he could no longer care about the banknotes. There was only one thought in his mind, that was so fucking painful. After Fang Linian succeeded in this hit, he picked up the flick knife and chased the delinquent who was pushing the electric bicycle. Seeing Fang Linian charged at him blankly with a flick knife and his big brother was already rolling on the ground in pain, this delinquent panicked. He yelled before ditching the electric bicycle and running away. Fang Linian saw that his electric bike was fine, and he was relieved. However, one carelessness would cause everything. As Fang Linian let his guard down, he felt a movement behind him. He hurriedly turned over, but as he turned half of his body, he saw the other delinquent smash the brick in his hand at him. Damn! Just as Fang Linian cursed half of this sentence in his mind, his vision blacked out, and he didn't know what happened after that. Hey, hey hey! The shout seemed to come from a long distance, but it seemed to be very close. Fang Linian opened his eyes laboriously. He felt a terrible headache, buzzing in his ears, and bursts of bitterness in his mouth. After opening his eyes, Fang Linian swallowed a mouthful of saliva with the taste of blood. He then saw light and shadow flickering. He raised his head laboriously to cover the light, and he gradually regained his vision. Finally, he saw a familiar face. Oh right, isn't he the internet cafe admin? Are you okay? After someone checked out and left, he suddenly returned and said that you were lying unconscious outside. Do you want me to call 120 for you? The internet cafe admin still looked a little anxious. After all, it happened not far away from the place he worked. He was just a part-time worker, how could he bear the responsibility? As Fang Linian was about to speak, there was a burst of indescribable fear in his mind all of a sudden. He abruptly stood up and staggered, but fortunately, he immediately supported the wall next to him. He said anxiously. What's the time now? The internet cafe admin checked the phone, then he said in astonishment. 12:15 am, what's wrong? Chapter 4, being later was better than not being there. After listening to the internet cafe admin's answer, Fang Linian's brain buzzed. He only felt that the blood on his body was surging up to his head. He couldn't care so much anymore. He looked around and found that his electric bicycle was still by the side, then he rode on the electric bicycle and left. After the electric bicycle galloped for several hundred meters, Fang Linian took a few deep breaths and kept chanting, calm down, calm down. He slowly regained his rationality. The electric bicycle speed gradually slowed down to normal speed. He obviously couldn't reach there on time now. What he could do now was to clean up the mess, but if he fucks up again in a panic now, maybe he wouldn't even have the chance to clean up the mess. Soon, Fang Linian came to the outside of Huishuan No. 5 pier. He had visited this place during the day. It was just an abandoned warehouse. Only some facilities on the pier had signs of being used, but there was also dust on them. However, under the cover of darkness at this time, it looked terrifying here. It even gave him an illusion that there was infinite danger in it, making him sweat in his palms. Fortunately, there was a large flooded area near here, there were still many toads croaking in it at this time. It could cover up the noise of Fang Linian's actions, which made him feel at ease. After coming here, Fang Linian knew that he must be late, and he was at least 10 minutes late. But since he had come all the way here, How could he be willing to just leave without taking a glance? Even if there was a risk, he had to give it a try. Thus, he found a secret place to park his electric bicycle, then he tiptoed over following his memory during the daytime. At this time, the inspection during the day undoubtedly played a great role. Fang Linian sneaked to an abandoned warehouse next to him. He had secretly opened a window here during the day and concealed it when he left. At this time, he opened the window and crawled over with difficulty. Fang Linian was terminally ill at this time. This simple climb could make him breathless and feel uncomfortable. He only felt that his chest was pressed by a large stone, even breathing was very difficult. He forcibly suppressed his breath, then he tiptoed to the second floor of the warehouse and looked toward the pier. Fang Linian was shocked at this sight. The pier, that was empty during the day, now had a yacht undulating with the waves, but only a few lights were switched on this yacht. Someone was obviously trying to hide it. Not only that, in the open space in front of the pier, there were 3 cars parking there. They were all black Lincoln Navigators. The lights of the 3 cars were all on, and one car still had the high beam to illuminate the whole place. However, this place, which should be very lively, was deadly silent. Even the sound of the distant sea beating against the embankment was clearly audible. That was all fine, the point was that there were corpses everywhere in this open space. All of these corpses were wearing black suits and looked well trained. Many corpses even had guns in their hands. Fang Linian was well prepared this time. He took out simple binoculars from his trouser pocket and looked at it, and he discovered a shocking fact. That was most of the corpses' expressions were frightened, scared, or even distorted. They seemed to be greatly frightened before death. Not only that, but their deaths were also extremely miserable. Most of them had broken legs and arms. Some were even split in half. Fang Linian even saw that the door of a Lincoln Navigator was struck by something sharp. A narrow crack of more than half a meter long was cut out. The edge of the iron sheet rolled out, it was smooth and sharp. The situation seems to be very complicated. It seems that there were 2 forces who wanted to trade here, then they were being attacked by other forces. Fang Linian said to himself. Then, in the field of vision of the telescope, something that made Fang Linian's heartbeat faster appeared. That was a box. A high-tech silver-white box. It is the silver box mentioned in the mysterious text message. There is also a crack in this box, and some of the contents were scattered out. On the lever of the box, there was a pale palm. This palm was cut off at the wrist, and the section was smooth. Although it was cut off, the 5 fingers of the severed palm still tightly clutched the lever of the box. This showed how strong the palm owner's desire to protect the box was. Fang Linian became excited at this moment. He immediately had an impulse to rush down, take the box and run. It seems that although I am late, it is not too late. The distance between my position and this box is no more than 20 meters. I only need 5 minutes to carry the box and disappear into the night. Fang Linian was a person with strong execution. He never procrastinated. He bent over and trotted directly to the first floor breathlessly. Just at this moment, there was already a burst of engine sounds from the sea in the distance, then he saw a modified motorboat driving over. The searchlight on the motorboat emitted a sharp light beam. The motorboat dragged out a long white wave behind it. After seeing this scene, Fang Linian's frustration was conceivable, but his will had become very determined after several months of tempering. He made the most optimal choice almost immediately. He hid in the warehouse next to him. After entering the warehouse, he realized that the warehouse looked quite spacious on the outside, but the inside was full of junks. There was little space for a person. There was also an indescribable stench smell. When Fang Linian hid in the warehouse and waited for his eyes to adjust to the darkness inside, he took a deep breath because he suddenly discovered something terrifying. It turned out that there was still another person in this warehouse. This was a woman in a suit and skirt. Although her face couldn't be seen, her skin was white and delicate. The tailored OL outfit also outlined her breathtaking figure vividly. Especially her slim waist, it made her buttocks and breasts more prominent, giving people a visual impact. However, her back was being stabbed by a rusty screwdriver. The stab hit the vital point, and the metal part of the screwdriver was inside her body. It seemed that her vitality was also extremely tenacious. After being seriously injured, she could still resist the pain and climb here. Fang Linian took a deep breath to forcibly suppress the uneasiness in his mind. After tiptoeing over, he smelled a faint fragrance on her body, he didn't know what perfume she was using. Then Fang Linian tried to test her breathing with his hand. He found that her skin was ice cold and delicate, but he couldn't feel her breath at all. He knew that she was already a dead person, so he breathed a sigh of relief right away. He then crawled to a crack by the side to look outside. But there would always be carelessness in careful observation. Fang Linian's attention was attracted by the movement outside, so he ignored a mini syringe on the ground next to him. After the modified motorboat docked at the pier, 2 men jumped from above. One man was very tall and dressed in a black windbreaker. He was holding a very special silver pistol in his hand without any scruples. Not sure if Fang Linian had an illusion, he actually felt that the surface of the pistol had a rippling light shining. The other man was even weirder. His right hand was actually carrying a small round shield. There were 2 red circles on the surface of the shield. Inside the red circle was a blue and white pentagram. It looked just like a children's toy. Chapter 5, Deceiving Each Other. After the 2 men came here, they were not surprised to see the scene of corpses all over the place. The man holding the shield shrugged and said, "Oh, Sultan, we seem to be late, Fang has gotten it." "Sultan," the man with the silver pistol, said faintly. "It can't be helped, Gar. Although it is likely to be a hidden story mission above level B, boss said that the main mission is the priority. Don't the Easterners have a proverb? Only the steak wriggles in your stomach truly belongs to you." The 2 began to separate and checked the scene at this time. After Sultan walked a few steps, he suddenly saw the cracked silver box and said with excitement, "Oh! We are not late yet, it seems that the key mission item has not been taken away by Fang." Gar also walked over immediately, bent down, and looked at it. He said with glittering eyes, "It really is the retrovirus sector injection. The difficulty to obtain this item isn't ordinary hard, it is a level B hidden missions key item. With it, we can successfully approach the president who has pancreatic cancer and get the access ticket to Area 51. But at this moment, in the darkness not far away, a slightly hoarse voice sounded. "Oh, gentlemen, please don't touch my things. I just went to catch an escaped prey, but it doesn't mean that I gave up my spoils." The sea under the night was constantly surging, and there was a faint fishy smell in the sea breeze. A black man appeared slowly from the darkness. His upper body was naked, and he looked very burly, but there was a crescent-shaped bloody scar on his chest. Although the scar seemed to have healed for a long time, it could be seen that the injury was tragic at that time. He was only wearing a pair of black tight shorts on his lower body. Moreover, this black man's right hand was carrying a bloody head. As soon as he appeared, he was like a ferocious beast with horrifying pressure. Seeing the black man, Gar and Sultan's expressions changed at the same time. Sultan suddenly raised the silver pistol and aimed at it. Gar took a step forward and placed the toy-like shield in front of him. One offense and one defense, it looked like a perfect formation. At this time, Sultan said solemnly, "Fang, there is no conflict of interest between us. I just got a piece of information, so I came to see it. We don't mean to your enemy. So, why don't we take a step back? I return the retrovirus sector injection to you, and you let us go." Fang laughed, showing his big white teeth. "What a coincidence. I just wanted to say that. It seems that we really happen to have the same view. We can have a drink together if there is a chance." Fang Linian, who was hiding on the second floor at this time, was undoubtedly extremely disappointed. He was eager for a battle between the 2 sides. It would be better if one party flees and the other party pursues it. If that was the case, wouldn't he be able to fish in troubled waters? As he just heard about retrovirus sector injection, he decisively took out his smartphone to search on Baidu. He found that this was a high-tech anti-cancer technology. The source of this technology was the gene therapy that won the Nobel Prize in Medicine a few years ago. The essence of cancer was actually the mutation of proto-oncogenes and tumor suppressor genes, so by injecting mutated genes into the human body, it could stop cancer from at its root. This was just a theoretical technology. He didn't expect that even related injection was actually developed. Therefore, Fang Linian can be sure that the injection in this silver-white box was really his only hope at the moment. But Fang Linian didn't expect that both sides didn't seem to want to fight. In just a few words, the tense atmosphere was resolved. So he couldn't help being disappointed now, but he could only wait silently now. When hearing Fang talking about having a drink, Gar also said with a smile, "I know there is a bar that has very good wine. Why don't we go tomorrow night? I'll treat." Fang laughed loudly. "Deal." As he spoke, he raised his fist and launched it into the air. This punch was a kind of etiquette of black people. It seemed very common. But at the moment Fang shook his fist, he suddenly loosened his fist, and a ping-pong ball-sized object fell from his palm. It exploded before it hit the ground, emitting a dazzling glare. Flash bomb! Fang Linian only felt that his eyes were stinging instantly, his vision was completely white. He instinctively raised his hands to cover his eyes. Even so, tears still continued to flow. What's more, the key was that while Fang made a move, Gar, who said he would treat, unexpectedly bent over suddenly and threw out the toy-like blue and white pentagram shield in his hand. At the moment when the shield was released, it gave people an illusion that it was not a shield that was thrown out, but a heavy truck that rushed forward at high speed. This small shield blasted out, bringing an enormous wind pressure like the 12th level storm. Even the junks, corpses, wooden boxes, and even cars were all squeezed to both sides. But in the face of this shield that was launched at him directly, Fang grinned hideously. He actually didn't retreat or dodge, but he lifted his hands and charged forward. He pressed his hands forward at the edge of the blue and white pentagram shield, and from Fang's both hands, a sizzling sound came along with smokes. The air was filled with a thick smell of burnt flesh. It seemed that what he was holding was not a shield, but a scorching steel ingot. Not only that, Fang also transformed rapidly. Hair began to grow all over his body, his skin became green and rough, his muscles began to swell quickly, there were even 2 fangs growing out from his jaw's gum. His body was enlarged by half a size, transforming from a normal person to a 2 meters tall giant. This was what Fang was proud of, beast change. It could instantly activate the beast's blood in his body, increasing his combat power sharply. However, even after completing beast change, he still could hardly resist the huge power from that shield. It could be seen that Fang's 2 thick arms only blocked the shield for less than a second, and he was directly pushed back. After that, the shield slammed into his chest. Half of Fang's chest collapsed immediately, and he spurted a mouthful of blood. His strong body was blown back for about 6 meters, and his back crashed into the front windshield of a Lincoln Navigator. The windshield shattered immediately. The huge impact even knocked the vehicle back for more than 2 meters. The tires dragged out 2.5 meters long black brake marks on the concrete floor. The vehicle's anti-theft alarm also buzzed immediately. After this blow, the blue and white pentagram shield also rebounded, drawing an arc in the air, then returning to Gar's hand. Gar, who got the hit, looked very unsightly now because there was a clear crack on the surface of the shield. It seemed that although this thing was powerful, the price to use it was costly. Sultan shot directly at Fang. Obviously, his gun had been modified. Its recoil was amazing. He needed to use both hands to hold the gun. After shooting, his hands went up by a lot to remove the huge recoil. The gunfire was not loud, but the muffled sound would bring a rumbling feeling into internal organs. After Fang was hit by a shot, his body was even pushed horizontally by half a meter on the car. He then rolled down from the car, bringing down a lot of glass shards. The flash bomb that Fang threw out seemed to be ineffective to the 2 of them. There was a saying that making one step wrong, then it was hard to get back on track. Such a sloppy mistake by Fang undoubtedly cost him a huge price. Chapter 6, Annoying. The only good news was that after Fang rolled down from the car, he got into a blind spot of the shooting range. If Sultan wanted to continue shooting, he had to change his shooting angle. However, after Sultan fired the first shot, he moved quickly. He ran for 2 steps, reached out and pressed on the railing beside him, and he jumped lightly. With this press and jump, he jumped for more than 1 meter high. He was already aiming his gun in mid-air, so he could fire again when landed. Sultan's pursuit was definitely not slow. After Fang rolled down from the car, he only disappeared from his vision for less than a second. But after Sultan got out of the blind spot, he found that the place where Fang should have been lying was actually empty. There was only a pile of glass shards and a pool of blood. How could this be? Sultan was startled, and he couldn't help looking carefully. But this happened to fall into Fang's calculations. Because just the next second Sultan looked carefully, a strong flash suddenly exploded. It turned out that Fang not only fled in time, but he also calculated Sultan's subsequent pursuit and left a flash bomb in place. This time Sultan was hit by the flash bomb directly, what he could see was dazzling white light. Knowing that he was in a bad situation, he immediately jumped to dodge, wanting to get out of his previous position. However, just as he leaped into the air, his vision turned blurred and he was knocked flying away with blood coming out of his mouth like he had bumped into a giant wall. It turned out that Fang, who had suffered continuous heavy blows, made astonishing explosive moves in an instant. When he rolled down from the car, he took advantage of entering the enemy's blind spot and grabbed the railing next to him. He then rolled into the bottom of the car after throwing a flash bomb. Then, at the same time that Sultan was blinded by the flash bomb, Fang had already picked up a metal box next to him and threw it at Sultan. It could be seen that Fang's strength after transformation was great. This metal box wasn't empty inside, it at least had 50 kilograms, but it was like throwing out a pebble for him. Fang's series of actions were completed without thinking, completely relying on his powerful fighting instinct. Not only that, after he threw out the box, he immediately rolled again. He let out a beastly roar from the deep in his chest, then he pounced forward with the agility that ordinary people could hardly reach. Fang's right hand was raised high, and it clenched into claws. He closed the distance of 20 meters in just a blink of an eye, then he waved his right hand at Gar. While waving down, Fang's right hand had sharp claws like wild beasts popping out. The claws were generally bony yellow, but looking closely, there was a metallic luster on the tip of the claws. The length of the claws was about 10 centimeters in length. It looked extremely sharp and indestructible. At this time, Fang Linian had regained his vision. He was hiding in the darkness on the second floor, not even daring to take a breath. But when he was watching the battle below, he was reluctant to even blink for a second. He wanted to remember every detail. Because Fang Linian had already seen that the battle below had completely transcended the technological scope of the world today. Whether it was the peculiar little shield that Gar held or the weird transformation of Fang, that power could only be seen in movies, comics, and TV series. What is actual is rational, Fang Linian was already a little dumbfounded. He muttered these words repeatedly to himself, and soon, he accepted the scene before him. Thanks to the series of unconventional events the day before yesterday, he was mentally prepared. It was not difficult for him to accept all this at this time. Later, Fang Linian was even more faintly excited. Why? Because his current terminal illness had made the world's medical technology helpless, then, the stronger the power these people showed, the greater the possibility of his own survival. Fang made the extreme forward somersault movement in the air, then he borrowed the momentum and clawed down. Gar immediately held the blue and white pentagram shield in his hand. The moment the claws and the shield collided, there was an ear-piercing friction. It even brought up a series of sparks. Gar was obviously completely suppressed in strength and could only stagger backward. When Fang had already forced him back, he crawled and ran on the ground like a wolf, launching another claw attack from the side. At this time, Gar had no time to dodge or parry. He could only watch the opponent's claw dig into his throat, but he shouted at this moment. East 30, South 12. After this shout, the sound of a dull gunfire. This shot hit Fang with great accuracy. Fang kicked the ground with his right foot without delay, doing a high-difficulty movement, a side somersault, to dodge the shot. His claw also missed and hit on the Lincoln Navigator's car door beside him. Suddenly, the black car door that was as smooth as a mirror emitted a deafening tearing sound. The edge of the iron sheet rolled up, it was smooth and sharp. A claw mark was torn out by half a meter long by Fang. What was revealed at this time was the strong tacit understanding between Gar and Sultan. At this time, Sultan was still blinded by the flash bomb. He could only hear the call and perform a blind shot. The number that Gar shouted was the codes they agreed upon, so that Sultan immediately used Gar's voice as the basis and shot toward 30 cm to the east and 12 cm to the south. As a result, they successfully forced Fang back. Seeing Fang's paw tearing the car door easily, Fang Linian finally affirmed one thing. That was the wounds of the people trading here were almost all cut by sharp instruments, in fact, they were all done by Fang's hands. This guy's murderousness was high, and his behavior was also cruel. He suddenly thought of another annoying thing. If I arrive on time according to the time of the text message, I will be able to reach the time gap when Fang went to kill his prey and before Sultan and Gar reached, and successfully get the injection. Thinking of this, what could Fang Linian do besides wailing in his heart? Chapter 7, Stabbed Ruthlessly. At this time, the battle situation was changing again. Although Fang was temporarily forced to retreat, as soon as he stabilized his figure, he immediately grabbed a stone next to him and threw it at Sultan. The muscle tendons on his arm bulged out when he threw. It could be seen that his explosive strength was strong. Sultan was still dizzy at this time. When the stone hit his forehead, he screamed in pain instantly. He staggered to retreat with a face full of blood. While throwing the stone, Fang kicked the Lincoln Navigator in front of him. The car was overturned by his strange power for 8 meters, and it rolled in the air and slammed down at Gar. The car window glass was splashing, the momentum was amazing. Fang Linian also noticed a detail at this time. Fang seemed to have the upper hand at this time, but it actually came at a price. The fracture of his chest was very obvious, and a lot of bloody mucus was flowing from the corner of his mouth. Not only that, when he kicked that Lincoln Navigator, it even worsened the wound in his abdomen. It was an orange-sized bloody hole pierced by Sultan's bullet head-on. As he exerted force in his leg, the bloody hole gushed out a large amount of blood. If an ordinary person suffered such injuries, it would be serious injuries for them. They could probably just lay on the floor and scream in pain. However, not only Fang could ignore these injuries, he was getting increasingly powerful, suppressing 2 formidable enemies with 1 person. Because of this, Fang Linian felt even more that he should be similar to the Berserker. Maybe he had a similar ability as the injury heavier, the stronger the strength. Only in this way could explain this situation. Therefore, the best strategy for both Sultan and Gar now should be guerrilla to drag out the fight. If this was the case, they must be the last one standing. To be honest, Fang Linian's ideas were good. In fact, Gar and his opinion were the same, but the problem was that Fang would never give them the chance. Fang's attack was like a storm, rendering them no room to breathe. Facing the falling car, Gar could only dodge it, but the next thing he had to face was Fang's claws that were following him like a ghost. He could only hold his shield to block. With a crisp clang, Gar was completely suppressed in strength. Although he defended Fang's blow, he inevitably staggered backward. Even worse, after another heavy blow, a crack appeared on the surface of the blue and white pentagram shield. Gar finally stabilized his center of gravity and stopped retreating, but Fang had already gotten into melee range, launching another barrage of attacks. Finally, after suffering repeated heavy injuries, the shield cracked and shattered completely. But at this time, Gar actually jumped backward with the force of the attacks. He got back for about 10 meters, falling straight into the sea. He was really calm. Although he was defeated, he didn't fall into chaos, and he could still take the opportunity to escape. Gar swam directly after falling into the water, swimming in the turbulent water. His movements were very smooth and free. Obviously, his swimming skills were very good. At this time, the surrounding light was very poor. If Fang Linian wasn't watching it from high ground, he would really not be able to see his movements. However, Fang actually trod a few steps at this time and jumped directly into the water. Fang Linian's pupils also shrank instantly. Because Gar's performance in the water was already quite good, it could be said to be at the level of professional swimmers. However, after Fang went into the water, he was forwarding at high speed like a torpedo. There were several black illusory runes around him. A white wave appeared behind him because of the high speed. This had completely exceeded the scope of underwater swimming. It was almost like Fang had his own propeller. In just 10 seconds, Fang caught up with Gar in the water. At this time, Gar still refused to give up. He grabbed the modified motorboat by the side, climbed up and rolled over to the deck. But at this time, Fang broke out of the water, like a big fish that rushed directly out of the water, and jumped directly onto the deck. He threw a punch at Gar's chest, piercing into it easily. The tips of the bone-yellow claws even protruded from his back. Gar showed an expression of extreme pain. Just as he was going to say something, Fang grinned, waved his left hand, and the claws swiped through. His head immediately flew into the sky. The scene was very horrifying. At this time, Fang Linian discovered a very strange thing. After Gar died, his body actually began to gradually become transparent, then there were a lot of translucent faint blue numbers of 0 and 1 jumping in his body. Finally, it shrank quickly, collapsed and turned into little light spots. After that, a bloody strange key was condensed, which was directly collected by Fang. Fang Linian, who had witnessed all of this next to him, burst into a cold sweat. What happened at this time was completely beyond his knowledge. He held a rusty fruit knife tightly in his right hand, which was found from a pile of junks beside him, and the handle of the knife was wet with cold sweat in his palm. Although Fang Linian himself knew very well that if he was really discovered, this fruit knife would be useless. Seeing the tragic death of his companion, Sultan turned around and fled at this time. His eyesight was actually restored when Gar's shield was destroyed. It was just that Fang and Gar were entangled together, so he had no confidence to shoot. At this moment, he knew very well in his heart that it would be useless for him to stay. He would just waste his life for no reason. After witnessing this scene, Fang Linian also shouted in his mind. Run now! The farther the better. In this case, if Fang goes to chase him, I will have a chance. It is unrealistic to take all the contents of the box, but it is not a big problem to grab a handful of it and run away. However, it was probably that Fang Linian had been having bad luck recently and everything went wrong for him, so his prayers seemed to be useless. Because after escaping more than 30 meters and turning into the back of a nearby building, Sultan, who was escaping, suddenly stopped. It could be seen that his hands holding the gun were glowing. His expression was very hideous too. His face flushed, and the blood vessels on his neck were swollen like a twisting green snake. Then, he actually made a strange move. He swept out both his hands as if he wanted to swing out his gun. In this sweep, he fired the gun. A foot-long faint blue flame spurted from the muzzle. Fang Linian, who witnessed the scene, couldn't understand it. Because at this time, there was a building between Sultan and Fang, and they couldn't even see each other. The only result of direct fire was directly hitting the wall. If it was the main gun of a tank, Fang might suffer damage. However, no matter how powerful this gun was, it was impossible to shoot through 2 or more concrete brick walls and hurt someone. However, a scene that stunned Fang Linian happened. The bullet from this shot actually flew out in a weird arc. To be precise, it was like a banana kick that bypassed the human defensive wall in football. It bypassed the brick walls in front and directly hit Fang, who was pursuing him. Gun skill, arc trajectory. A blood arrow came out from Fang. Then, his forwarding momentum did not diminish, and he had already bumped into the dilapidated warehouse next to him. A burst of loud noise came out, then it became quiet. Sultan, who had succeeded in the blow, was gasping for breath at this time. He was drenched in sweats as if the shot had drained all his stamina. He couldn't even hold the silver gun right now, his hands just drooped softly. At this moment, there was a strong ruthlessness in his eyes. He walked a few steps outside, looked at the tattered warehouse. Fang rushed in, and muttered to himself. Let's see how you survive this. This battle could be said to be ups and downs, thrilling, but in the end it seems that Sultan's amazing had an end to this fight. To be honest, Fang Linian could have guessed the ending, but he was not satisfied, because Sultan seemed to just have some minor injuries. If he tried to fight for the silver box with him, he would be headshot on the spot. The enemy could even kill him by one kick. Sultan looked at the warehouse where Fang had fallen into, and he didn't mean to get close at all. Instead, he quickly stepped back and threw an incendiary bomb into it. Flames started to spread immediately, turning the warehouse into a sea of flames. Then he rushed toward the wreckage of an abandoned tower crane next to it, because this was the commanding height within a few hundred meters nearby. After occupying this place, he could retreat and jump directly into the sea, and he could control everything from a high altitude. It could be said that he had an upper hand of the situation. Just at the moment Sultan sprinted, a figure covered with fire suddenly stood up from the window of the warehouse. It was Fang. If a normal person caught fire all over his body, he must be rolling on the floor and screamed miserably. However, this figure showed an indescribable calmness. In Fang Linian's eyes, Fang even stood silently in the sea of fire for a few seconds as if it was not his body that was being burned. After that, he locked his gaze at Sultan's figure. Fang raised his left hand. It could be seen that there were only 4 fingers in his left hand, his little finger had been cut off. But now, he grabbed his ring finger and then pulled it out. He started to accumulate energy as he chanted, he became tense like a stretched bow. In an instant, a faint black mist condensed into peculiar patterns around the broken finger, appearing and disappearing in a loop. This looked very strange. Then Fang threw the finger forward. That finger was so fast that it was almost teleporting like lightning, piercing right between Sultan's eyebrows in the distance. The illusions lingering around the broke finger once again turned into the black mist, then the black mist condensed into a twisted face with a crazy smile that slowly dissipated. Sultan trembled all over with an unbelievable look in his eyes. His eyes rolled up as hard as he could. Seeing the crooked finger that seemed to be embedded in the center of his eyebrows, his pupils gradually dilated, and he fell to the ground and died. The same scene happened after Sultan died. His body faded and turned into a large number of 0 and 1, then the number disappeared slowly, leaving a bloody key in the end. Fang walked over step by step. After leaving the sea of flames, the flame on his body quickly went out, but the wound on his body was still bleeding. Fang's footsteps were still steady, he didn't seem like a seriously injured person. After he picked up the bloody key, he took out a light red potion and bottomed it up. He stood there with his eyes closed as if he was resting. At this time, the scene was quiet. Only the sound of the tide rising and falling and the cracking sound from the fire scene could be heard. Fang Linian did not dare to even breathe at this time. He wished he could sew his mouth. However, at this moment, he suddenly heard a soft noise coming from behind him. The sound immediately made Fang Linian look back, then he desperately found that it came from the woman's corpse that he had checked before. At this moment, the corpse's hands were already unconsciously groping for something. Her mouth was even making vague moans. Fang Linian was anxious now. As he looked around, he realized there was a mini syringe next to him. Obviously, this woman knew that the situation was not good when she crawled in, and she had given herself an emergency first aid injection. At this time, the first aid injection seemed to have an upper hand after fighting the death for so long. Of course, this was also due to Fang Linian's lack of experience. People, who were seriously injured and unconscious, their breathing, blood pressure, and pulse may all be slowed down to a certain level. They would recover slowly after giving some time. Therefore, he was too sloppy to determine her death by just checking her breathing. Seeing the movement of the seriously injured girl getting bigger and bigger, the muscles on Fang Linian's face kept trembling. He took a deep breath, and he calmed down all of a sudden. He crawled onto the girl and suppressed, and he covered her mouth at this same time. However, contrary to expectations, the severely injured woman whose mouth was being covered still struggled based on her instinct even though she was still unconscious. Simultaneously, she let out a series of vague sounds. If this continued, they would be discovered sooner or later. In front of such a cruel reality, Fang Linian pursed his lips. His eyes became indifferent, and he stabbed with the fruit knife in his hand. It penetrated through her rib cage into her heart, his left hand was still covering her mouth. The woman trembled violently all over her body and began to spasm fiercely like a shrimp out of the water, but she was held down firmly by Fang Linian. After her body stiffened for a few seconds, her body slowly relaxed. Fang Linian was also soaked in sweat at this time, his vision turned dark. He was close to collapse. After another few minutes, Fang slowly exhaled a bloody mist. His transformation state was lifted, and he became the burly black man with a scar on his chest again. He turned his arm, and a sportswear appeared out of thin air in his hand. He put it on and wore a cap, then he disappeared into the night with the silver box. The result of this battle was so unexpected. Looking at the warehouse ignited by the incendiary bomb below, the entire night sky had been dyed red. Fang Linian knew that he could not wait any longer. Such a fire could be easily seen at night from dozens of kilometers away, so someone had already called the fire department. He gritted his teeth and whispered in the ear of the female corpse below. "Sorry, it's either you die or me die." Then Fang Linian stood up. He resisted the discomfort caused by the murder, took out his mobile phone, left the hiding place and walked into the scene. He just stayed for less than a minute around those corpses. Then he walked into the darkness to look for something. It took him 5 minutes to do that. After that, he rode onto his electric bicycle and left. Chapter 8, Buy Medicine. One day later. Ahem, ahem ahem ahem. After a violent cough, Fang Linian's face was pale. His teeth were making a giggling loud noise. His forehead was full of cold sweat. His body bent like a shrimp out of the water. It took a while for him to become better, then he wiped his lips with a handkerchief. Looking at the shocking black and red on the handkerchief, he put it aside and stepped into an old-fashioned residential building. After checking the door plate, he came to the tenant on the right on the 3rd floor. As he was about to reach out and knock on the door opened by itself. The one who opened the door was a flat-headed man with a green tattoo on his neck. One of his arms was in plaster, and he said rudely, "Boy, get out of the way." Then he knocked Fang Linian away and left. As soon as Fang Linian entered the door, he smelled the smell of disinfectant. The floor was dirty, the furniture was messy, and everywhere were bloody toilet paper, cigarette butts, etc. However, he couldn't see anyone here. He coughed and said, "Is Dr. Joe there?" There was a sound of flushing from the toilet beside, then a pale, decadent and thin middle-aged man came out of it. His beard was messy. It seemed that he had worked throughout the night. His eyes were deeply sunken. The white coat on him was very dirty with a few patches of blood. The man did not answer, and he said coldly and vigilantly. Who told you to come? Fang Linian opened his hand and said. Old Xia, who likes to modify car, said that I can buy some things here that I can't find elsewhere. Hearing the words Old Xia, Dr. Zhou relaxed. He lit a cigarette and took a breath, then looked up and down at the thin Fang Linian. He said impatiently. Did you bring money? Put it on the table. Fang Linian took out 2,000 yuan from his pocket. Seeing the money, Dr. Zhou counted it before said faintly. Do you want crazy powder or happy water? I even still have Wave King number 1 here, just these 3, but Wave King number 1 requires additional money. Fang Linian shook his head and said. No, I want Eve, painkiller, and that kind of suction-type Hercules super nitrogen pump. Eve needs 20, and the super nitrogen pump needs 2 bottles. Dr. Zhou was stunned, and he said in an annoying tone. Are you looking for death? Eve with Hercules will not make you high at all. It will only numb your nerves and make you unable to sleep at night. If you do this, you will get severe kidney failure in 2 to 3 years. Fang Linian said indifferently. 2 to 3 years, are too long. Dr. Zhou was stunned. What? Fang Linian said. I have advanced lung cancer. I'm not here to buy medicine to get high, but to make my day less intolerable. Dr. Zhou remained silent for a while before saying. Is it confirmed? Fang Linian smiled bitterly. I hope not. Dr. Zhou didn't say much, turned around and entered the room. Soon, he came out with a shopping bag. This is the cocaine that was smuggled from the Netherlands. If it is paired with the Hercules super nitrogen pump, the analgesic effect will be better. But you can only take 1 capsule at a time and no more than 3 capsules per day, understand? After speaking, he threw the bag to Fang Linian, then he looked at the money on the table, took a 100 yuan piece, and impatiently stuffed the remaining money back to Fang Linian. Go, go, don't disturb me doing business. Really? Fang Linian was stunned, but he was pushed out of the door. He was silent for a while, but did not say thank you. He took a few steps, then he looked at Dr. Zhou sentimentally before turning around and leaving. About half an hour later, Fang Linian took the medicine and returned to his residence. The combination of the two allowed Fang Linian to suppress the pain of terminal cancer and squeeze out the last energy in his weakened body. This was certainly not a good thing, and it would even shorten Fang Linian's expected lifespan of only 8 months to 4 months. But at this time, what choice did Fang Linian have? At this time, on Fang Linian's desk, there was already a piece of paper with a few lines of handwriting scribbled on it. It was the information and clues he gathered. However, the sudden pain of advanced cancer made Fang Linian stop temporarily, and he had to go out to buy medicine. What was written on this line of paper was Fang Linian's analysis of Fang. Yes, anyone with a discerning eye could see that the key to Fang Linian's survival was the hands of this powerful and mysterious guy, Fang. What Fang Linian had to do was to kill him and retake the retrovirus sector injection. This was also the only chance to survive for Fang Linian. However, for Fang Linian, killing a powerful man like Fang was simply a difficult task. Let alone Fang, for Fang Linian, he would even be incapable of killing a chicken. At the same time, the changes on the pier also caused fierce turbulence in the entire underground world. Items like the retroviral vector injections being stolen were already enough to cause shocking influence. Because this thing could be said to have surpassed the current peak technology for at least 2 generations. The strength of the organization that created it was extremely powerful. The organization that could take this thing out of the secret research institute in Sweden also had an extremely huge force. They had now lost people and the item. No one survived in the pier. Such matters of course made the whole organization enraged. They claimed to investigate the truth at all costs and get the item back. However, as far as the information they had now, they were completely at a loss as to the identity of the assailant. Because according to many professionals who went to the scene, there were so many doubts in that battle which simply subverted their common sense. This group of people never expected that the information about the assailant that they were looking desperately for was placed on the desk of a young man. After taking the newly bought medicine, Fang Linian sat down in front of the desk again. At this time, there were 2 abnormal blushes on his pale cheeks, and there seemed to be gleaming light in his eyes, but that energy was the result of burning his life at all costs. He began to compile the information he wrote. Chapter 9, Fang, you are going to die. Name, Fang. Sex, male. Age, between 18 and 40 years old. Race, African. Ability, beast change, successfully transformed into a powerful beast. Ability, berserker blood, it should be able to convert the injury into strong combat power. The more severe the injury, the more speed and strength will be increased. It increases speed by 2.35 times, visual observation, which is faster than normal humans, and its power increased is 3.1 times, visual observation. Ability, use flash bomb. The target has superb skill in using flash bombs, and it is completely unpredictable. From this, it can be concluded that he can use grenades well. Ability, bone claw, the target has sharp bone claws after transforming, which can easily tear apart the car door and human body. Ability, finger sacrificing mystic art, the target ripped off one of his own fingers, then he seemed to use a mysterious spell to kill the enemy like a flying knife with the broken finger. It can't be defended at all. However, this move is regarded as a killing move by the target, so he must pay a huge price for using it. It can be seen from the target's left hand that there were only 4 fingers at the time, so the cost is at least that the broken finger could no longer be recovered. The materials that appeared at this time were all witnessed by Fang Linian at the time, so he listed one of them on the paper. He then closed his eyes and began to meditate. Gradually, Fang Linian's brows stretched. He opened his eyes suddenly and smashed the table. A sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. I know how. But there are still things that need to be certified. Immediately afterward, Fang Linian opened a second-hand crappy laptop. It was the type of laptop that the fan would creak when turned on. It took 3 minutes to turn on. He took out his mobile phone, uploaded several videos and some pictures to the computer, then he zoomed in with the software that came with it. Soon, Fang Linian found what he wanted in the videos and pictures. He picked out a photo and began to look at it carefully. Although Fang Linian's phone camera didn't have high pixels, it could be seen that this photo was taken at the scene of the battle that day. The corpses were everywhere, the burning warehouse, and the overturned black Lincoln Navigator were all telling the tragedy of the battle that day. In one of the photos, it was a close-up of a corpse. The death of the corpse was very tragic. His chest should be torn apart by Fang after transformation. The bulletproof vest inside the suit had the same fate too. The wound on his chest was more than a dozen centimeters. Even the internal organs were exposed. However, Fang Linian's focus was not here. He directly zoomed in on the photo, and the final focus was on a tattoo above the corpse's heart. This tattoo looked very unique. It looked like a fuzzy triangle. He nodded in satisfaction, then made a red circle mark here. Immediately afterward, Fang Linian began to take screenshots in the video, then he found a similar pattern on a leather bag, and he continued to mark it. After looking at the 2 marks for a while, Fang Linian fell into deep thoughts for a while, then he went back to the previous video and paused the video on a Lincoln Navigator. The car was pierced by Fang's claws and the glass was shattered, so several documents could be seen scattered on the seat of the vehicle. He continued to zoom into the documents, then he found another suspicious point in the blurred image quality, then he made a mark. These 3 marks were all similar. They all had the shape of a dark red triangle, and they had one thing in common. They looked like some kind of logo. Fang Linian began to tap on the keyboard and began to search for something on the internet. Soon he got the answer. He closed his eyes and tapped gently on the table with his fingers. After a few minutes, his eyes suddenly lit up and said softly, "Very well, the most important piece of the puzzle is here." Then Fang Linian stood up excitedly and walked around in the room. After a while, he sat down in front of the table again, picked up the paper and pen again, and started writing and drawing on it. This time, he wrote 3 words. Character habit deduction. A. Fang uses flash bombs very well. His profession has a high probability of being an active soldier, mercenary, baseball/basketball player. B. Before I came, Fang had transformed once and carried out a massacre on the people present. When he transformed, his body size would increase by more than 50%, so the clothes and shoes he was wearing would be broken. I found a torn leather shoe and a shirt on the scene. Leather shoes are the luxury brand of Berluti. It was established in Paris, France in 1895. It has been operated by 4 generations of family members. The price has exceeded 110,000, and it must be customized in Paris. The shirt is made of high count poplin and the brand is Charvet, founded in Paris in 1838. It can be seen that Fang himself should have a close relationship with France. He is more inclined to comfortable, low-key, and luxurious handmade brands. This is a life habit that is difficult to conceal. Then, such a person with extravagant life will not have too many choices in terms of food, clothing, housing, and transportation after coming to a foreign country. See, 2 minutes and 14 seconds after transforming, Fang used his self-inflicting killing move and tore out his finger to kill the man named Sultan. Judging from the situation of Fang's left hand, it is very likely that the broken finger will not grow after this skill is performed, which is costly. However, Fang had actually figured out Sultan's trump card at the time. If he settled down and continued to fight, he would have a great chance of winning, so why did he want to end the battle so anxiously? There is a great possibility that his transformation was ending. In other words, the time for him to transform should be about 3 minutes. At this point, Fang Linian frowned, covered his mouth and coughed, but he quickly took the medicines to relieve the symptoms. Then, Fang Linian sat back next to the laptop again. This time he logged into several news websites from abroad. Fang Linian quickly scolded the web pages. In the end, his eyes stayed on a piece of news. On the 17th, Landor, the president of a well-known high-tech company, traveled to Thai City, the financial center of the Asia-Pacific region. It seems to be related to the launch of its flagship product Airsong in Asia. Landor will attend the press conference and showcase the latest Airsong flagship product. It is reported that this is a pioneering handheld audio-visual product. It even uses epoch-making augmented reality technology. Landor was diagnosed with a pancreatic neuroendocrine tumor 3 years ago, but it has been actively treated. After seeing this news, Fang Linian murmured, "Very good, very good. This is the last piece of the puzzle." After he repeatedly confirmed several times, he finally took a long breath. He stood up, walked out of the window, looked at the dark sky and the twinkling stars. After a long time, he whispered, "I'm so sorry, Fang, you are going to die." Chapter 10, Voodoo Doll. 12 hours later. Among the most famous hotels in Thai City, lands Carlton 7 Stars Hotel. Fang stood in the bathroom. Warm hot water came out from the shower head above, washing his greasy dark skin. It could be seen that Fang's body shape was maintained quite well. He looked just like a professional athlete, the contours of the concave and convex muscles were clearly visible. When Fang Linian saw Fang previously, Fang had 3 major injuries on him. The first was a heavy shield blow in the chest. At least 3 ribs were broken, and his chest collapsed. Not only that, but he was shot twice, one shot in the abdomen, and a scary bowl-sized wound appeared. The other shot drew a curve that completely violated the laws of physics at his neck. Fortunately, Fang dodged in time, but he was also hit by a shot on the scapula near his neck. The wound was mangled and bloody, even his scapula was visible. But now, Fang's serious injury had mostly healed. The collapsed chest had recovered, and the scapula and abdomen wounds were stitched, but there were obvious signs of healing, the surface already had scabs. After taking a shower, Fang put on a nightgown casually, then he went to the outside living room of the suite. There was already a table full of delicious food and a bottle of Romani Conti wine. He poured himself a glass of wine, then he began to deal with the exquisite foods on the table. It could be seen that although Fang ate fast, he didn't gobble up the food. Even when he was alone, he also showed very professional aristocratic etiquette. It was not difficult to infer that he lived in a privileged environment since he was a child. At this time, someone outside suddenly rang the doorbell. Fang was stunned, then he walked to the door and said, "Who is it?" The other person spoke politely. "Sir, among the dishes you ordered earlier, there is a mozzarella chicken. This dish needs to be marinated for 80 minutes before it is suitable for processing, so that the taste of this dish can be fully manifested. I am here to serve the dish." After listening to it, Fang recalled for a moment, and he returned to the table to look at the menu. After making sure that he did order this dish, he walked over and opened the door. But he was a cautious person, so he put his eyes on the peephole before opening the door. However, when Fang closed one eye and put the other eye on the peephole, a tooth sculpture hanging from his neck suddenly cracked, and a lot of cracks appeared on it. A horrible feeling suddenly surged from Fang's spine, then he saw that opposite the peephole of the door, there was a cracking sound. A dark shadow came straight in. At this moment, time seemed to have slowed down dozens of times. Fang let out a strange cry and suddenly raised his head to the back. He saw a stainless steel needle pierced through the peephole. If Fang was slowed for 0.1 second, it would have pierced through his eyeball into his brain. The other party accurately calculated that Fang would definitely look into the peephole. They actually used such a vicious trap. When Fang raised his head and backed up in time, the steel needle was still coming at him like a poisonous snake. It was only 3 centimeters away from his eyeball, but this distance was out of reach. Seeing that the steel needle had stopped, Fang felt a little relieved. He had already been thinking about how to fight back. However, the tip of that steel needle spun abruptly, emitting a thick white mist from the tip of the needle. Fang's pupils shrank suddenly. He wanted to curse right now. Even if this steel needle continued to go forward or it exploded to hurt him with shrapnel, Fang still had a way to dodge it, but it actually shot out a cloud of mist. This made him really desperate. Less than a second after the white mist filled his face, Fang had already rolled out. He didn't feel pain at this time, but he felt a sweet smell in his nostrils. Fang didn't have the time to think now because the door was exploded, followed by a burst of gunfire. When the bullet hit the floor and the wall, there would even be a small explosion. Even the cement wall had bowl-sized pits. Obviously, it was specially made. After Fang rolled and left, he went straight to the bathroom. He grabbed the wet bath towel he used before and wiped his face. At the same time, he took out a magical black medicine and swallowed it. Why was this medicine magical? Because after Fang swallowed it, it made a human-like scream, which really overturned human common sense. Fang rolled away, wiped his face, and ate the medicine in one go. It could be seen that he was very experienced in dealing with such a surprise attack. As he turned around, there was a voodoo doll made of animal bones and straw. It was shrouded in a black mist. Fang cut a wound on his wrist, and blood was flowing onto the voodoo doll. Then, with a wave of his hand, he threw the voodoo doll toward the outside of the bathroom. Not only that, there was also a flash bomb following behind the voodoo doll. A dazzling light shone in the room. 30 seconds later, the group of elites who had gone through cruel agent training died tragically on the spot. At least half of them were killed by their own people. The most terrifying part of the voodoo doll was to create hallucinations to let them shoot at each other. For the remaining half, the cause of death was heart rupture due to excessive fear. At this time, Fang, who was hiding in the bathroom, stood up. With a sneer, he changed into a suit leisurely. He even washed his hands and tidied up his hairstyle before walking out casually with a suitcase. He was so steady, like he was a business elite who was going to negotiate. However, when Fang walked out of the broken door and came to the corridor, the sneer at the corner of his mouth instantly solidified. Because he suddenly saw that there were 3 people in front of him facing away from him. All 3 people were wearing windbreakers with their hats covering their heads, which made them look a little strange. The problem was that the voodoo doll that he used was dancing in front of these 3 people, and there was a dark and strange aura fluttering in the air which occasionally formed a distorted screaming human face and slowly dissipated. However, these 3 people completely ignored the power of voodoo doll's spiritual curse. They just stood there silently like a statue. Even Fang's appearance could not attract their attention. Suddenly, the 3 people turned around, raised their heads slightly, and looked at Fang. Chapter 11, A Distant Murderous Intent. 10 minutes ago. In the rolling desert tens of thousands of kilometers away. The sun was scorching everything under it, hundreds of meters of sandy hills were undulating and stretching far. The fine yellow sand showed a graceful arc under the wind blow. The surface temperature had reached 80 degrees Celsius. The air had an apparent distortion under such a high temperature. The spire of the huge pyramid was looming in the distance, the clear water of the Nile River flowed from the canal channel in the distance, reflecting the sunlight. There were many sailboats fishing on it, showing a vibe of vitality. This was Fayoum Oasis in Egypt. However, in the yellow sand outside the oasis, there was a peculiar valley. The valley seemed to be densely covered with rubble. It was a desolate area, but if one looked carefully, many of the rubble on the ground were actually ancient shell fossils. Not only that, in the valley, there were 11 ancient giant whale fossils exposed on the surface. Their leftover bones were more than 10 meters long. Even if they had turned into fossils, they still occupied a big area of the ground, telling the ancient mystery and vastness. This place was the famous Whale Valley. The desolate valleys with rolling yellow sand and scorching sun at this time were still blue and beautiful 40 million years ago. In the vast straits, ancient giant whales rose up here, mated, reproduced, and died, leaving only huge fossils to prove their existence. There was a constant stream of visitors throughout the year. However, at this time, 1 kilometer outside Whale Valley it was already blocked by the armed police. Tourists were dissuaded from afar, and there was a group of men in black guarding the entrance of Whale Valley with solemn faces. Even the military and police could enter here. Several large pits had been excavated in the Whale Valley. In one of the huge pits, the skeleton of a huge monster was exposed. This thing was one of the most ferocious creatures in the history of the Earth, the skeleton of Basilosaurus. This behemoth had a body of more than 20 meters and had savage teeth. When it was alive, scientists even believed that its bite force could easily exceed 13,000 kilograms, which was almost 30 times that of a brown bear and 6 times of the adult Nile crocodile. At the head of the Basilosaurus fossil, there was a group of staff in white coats, but they were obviously led by a bearded middle-aged man sitting in a wheelchair. A large number of wires were connected to the head of Basilosaurus. Various data was quickly summarized, then it was relayed to the screen in front. A man who was operating said excitedly and quickly. As we all know, Basilosaurus is a very unique creature. Its spine had evolved into a unique closed spine. The bone marrow flows in a peculiar liquid form inside the spine. There is also a very unique closed structure at the junction of the cranial cavity and the spinal cord. The bone tissue there is more than half a meter thick. Up to this point, the man said excitedly. So, if this Basilosaurus was directly buried by a submarine volcanic eruption when it was alive, and it was carbonized in the coal seam formed by a large number of macroalgae, then it is possible to find active gene fragments in this enclosed structure in the cranial cavity. At this time, a light suddenly shone by the side. A holographic projection of a little girl in a white dress appeared, but her voice was cold and ruthless, it was completely the mechanical and electronic synthetic tone. Warning, warning, the first event sequence occurred. Everyone looked over at the same time, their faces were full of surprise. Of course, they knew that this was just a holographic projection, but it was the holographic projection of Elizabeth, the brain of the entire huge group, who appeared to issue a warning at this time. Something big must have happened. The bearded middle-aged man raised his head and said a little displeased. Elizabeth, we are now trying to extract the gene fragments of Basilosaurus. You know the significance of this. Once it is successful, it can more than double the combat effectiveness of our biological weapons. Go to the other directors. Artificial intelligence, Elizabeth said coldly. Director Swan, this event sequence is related to you. It is a follow-up to the retrovirus sector injection. Director Swan said coldly. Didn't the board make a decision on the matter of retrovirus sector injection? The culprit has been taken to become an experiment subject, and the SRT Rapid Reaction Force has also been sent to recover the injection. Is there any problem? Elizabeth continued in an expressionless voice. The 2 teams of SRT Rapid Reaction Forces we sent have been completely eliminated. One group has suffered serious losses and almost lost combat power. The target is about to flee. The Asia Command Center their requests for the authorization to use the biological weapon, Ouroboros Type B. After hearing Elizabeth's words, before Director Swan spoke yet, a person next to him had already objected loudly. No. Absolutely not. It's not the Oceanian Islands that are backward. It's the Thai city, one of the 7 free ports in the world. It's a metropolis with 27 million people. If we activate Ouroboros Type B there and anything goes wrong, we will be in a passive situation. Director Swan said indifferently. Give him. The man said anxiously. But the consequence? Suddenly, Director Swan, who was sitting in a wheelchair, turned his head and glanced at the man. The man immediately became frightened. He opened his mouth a few times to speak, but he couldn't make any sound. Then, his head was actually exploded, a bloody mist filled the surrounding area, and the stench was unacceptable. The headless corpse still turned around in a daze for a few times before falling down slowly. Director Swan said lightly at this time. The previous data was too redundant. Restart the server and we continue to study. Elizabeth's synthetic voice sounded. The activation of Ouroboros Type B biological weapons requires secondary authorization. Please authorize by voiceprint. Director Swan, the secondary command has been received, and the analysis server has begun to restart. Director Swan said lightly. Authorize. As Director Swan spoke, the screen in front of him flashed. It began to enter the state of self-check and restart. A logo was shown on the screen when the system was in standby mode, it was actually a dark red triangle. Then, the word umbrella popped up. Chapter 12, Zombie. Fang looked at the three strange people in front of him, frowned, and took out a pistol with a silencer with a flip of his wrist, then he directly aimed and pulled the trigger. Since someone had already found and launched an attack, then staying here longer would only increase the danger. Fang was best at transformation and voodoo, but his shooting skill was at least comparable to a well-trained soldier. Therefore, after he pulled the trigger, the bullet accurately hit the chest of an enemy in front of him, knocking him back 2 steps. However, it only repelled for 2 steps. The person who was being shot became violent abruptly. His eyes turned white, and he widened his mouth, showing the gruesome white teeth. He stretched out his hands while pouncing at Fang. The stench of salivation at the corner of his mouth spread in the air. He was even making a non-stop gasp. The shot didn't hurt him at all. Not only that, the other 2 people also removed their caps and pounced up like a beast hunting its prey with a primitive and cruel desire. This is, hee hee hee, 3 zombies. Fang sneered. Really funny, you think I'm an ordinary person. As soon as Fang raised his hand, he directly blasted the head of the zombie at the front. This guy immediately skewed his head against the wall as if he was drunk. Although his 4 limbs were still struggling frantically, he had already lost control of the central nervous system. The other zombie pounced on him, but Fang had already taken 2 steps back, going back into his room. The zombie of course didn't give up. As his head just came through the door, Fang closed the door fiercely. With a loud bang, the zombie's head was immediately smashed. A black and red viscous liquid was flowing out which smelled very fishy. This zombie danced on the ground in a drunken state, and he fell to the ground. His gruesome white teeth were still gnawing on the leg of the coffee table. The creaking sound was extremely horrifying. For the last zombie, Fang directly threw him out of the window. An unlucky guy's car was being smashed from the fall, the car had become a scrap now. Piece of cake. Fang showed a scornful smile at the corner of his mouth, then he didn't forget to look in the mirror and tidy up his appearance before walking out. But after he walked out of the door, he noticed a soft ding-dong from the elevator more than 10 meters away. The elevator opened slowly. Fang frowned and retreated for half a step, but it was a man in a suit running out. He seemed panicked, which showed that he was just an ordinary person. After he glanced at Fang, he immediately ran over as if he had encountered a life-saving straw. However, he looked pain after walking halfway through. He knelt to the ground suddenly. At this time, he was still extending his hand at Fang unwillingly while screaming vaguely. "Help! Help me!" It was just that at this time, white smoke appeared directly on his body, then all his clothes burned up. The surface of his body reached a very high temperature at this moment. Immediately afterward, his movements became stiff. The color and texture of his skin also changed rapidly as if he had turned into a pale grey statue in an instant. The surface material of the statue was similar to the bright texture of dissolved wax oil and plastic, and it had been smeared with a layer of viscous liquid. The statue itself maintained a desperate gesture of reaching out for help. After seeing this weird statue, Fang's face suddenly changed because he suddenly felt a strong threat was rising from the statue. He pulled the trigger immediately. But after Fang fired 3 shots in a row, he found that the bullets were shot into a mud, they disappeared without a sound. As he felt something was, he ran forward, wanting to eliminate the danger before it was fully manifested. Just when he just stepped forward, he heard a peculiar breaking sound across the air. It was like the sound of dry bark cracking and also the sound of glass being stepped on. Immediately afterward, the back of the statue spurted waves of white breaths. From the middle of the spine, a half-a-meter opening was cracked open. Seeing this scene was really similar to the scene when insects like cicadas and dragonflies shed their skins. From the big opening behind the statue, there was a huge thing struggling to break out of the body. The surface of this thing was covered with a lot of viscous liquid, and a lot of white filaments were pulled out. It looked quite disgusting. Fang wanted to move forward, but he could only hold his nose and retreat. It was because the white breath from the back had a strong fishy smell like rotten fermented amniotic fluid. That was still fine. The key was that not long after these white breaths dispersed into the air, whether it was in contact with the nose or eyes, it was extremely uncomfortable. It even brought a faint tingling, which meant it was very corrosive. A few seconds later, there was a crisp sound as water splashed everywhere. A strange figure slowly crawled out of the statue. It looked like a skinned blood-red lizard. Only its head was somewhat human-like. But this thing's lips had shrunk back, and its gums began to bulge, making its canine teeth look particularly obvious. The bloody gaze in his eyes was very obvious. Not only that, its muscles had strangely grown to the limit, and even its skin was directly torn apart. Combined with its completely human appearance, it looks extraordinarily hideous and cruel. This was the biological weapon experiment subject, Ouroboros Type B. Fang aimed at it and fired continuously, but bullets seemed to be very ineffective against it. In this case, Fang had only a few choices. He decisively let out a roar, rushing straight at this monster. During the rush, Fang's body also frantically enlarged. He had activated beast change. A unique beastly roar resounded in the corridor. In just a few seconds, blood was splashed on the ground, walls and ceiling like ink. In a moment, Fang directly cut off half of the enemy's head. However, he soon discovered that even in the neck cavity of the headless subject, a tentacle that was mutated from many blood vessels spewed out a lot of acid. Obviously, this monster no longer had the conventional vital parts. Its head had become a bait for the enemy. Chapter 13, Project Purger initiated. Fang was caught off guard. The acid was sprayed on his chest a little. It was like sulfuric acid, making a sizzling sound while emitting a stinky burnt smoke. It could even scorch the nerves, which brought extreme pain. If an ordinary person was hit by it, he would roll on the ground while screaming in pain. But for Fang, who had transformed, the pain could increase his combat power. In just a dozen seconds, Fang cut Ouroboros Type B's body in front of him into pieces. The sharpness of his claws was definitely not something ordinary flesh and blood could resist. Of course, Fang wanted to make a quick fight, and he paid a considerable amount of price. A bowl-sized bloody hole was directly dug out on his right chest. At the same time, 3 fingers were broken in his left hand, but such injuries were not unacceptable for him. It was worth mentioning that when Fang was slashing up the enemy in front of him, he found that his internal organs had undergone obvious changes. There were a large number of strange creatures of black and red like small snakes entangled together. Even his blood had turned into a black-red viscous paste. At this time, Fang couldn't think about these things now. In fact, he had even encountered stranger things. Now that he already knew that the enemy had eyes on him, and he was in a passive situation, so the top priority was to avoid the next wave of attack. At this time, he did not go to the elevator because this place was the easiest place to set up traps. Instead, he ran directly to the fire exit. According to his strong physical attribute after transforming at this time, he only used about 30 seconds to run all the way from the 12th floor to the L2 basement. Here in the garage, Fang also had a backup plan. He removed the canvas on the side, and a modified Harley-Davidson appeared in front of him. Motorcycles were far more flexible and faster than cars, so it was Fang's first choice. At this time, another 6 people rushed down from above. They were all dressed in black suits and armed with firearms. They should be blocking the door at the elevator above, and they rushed down when they found something wrong. But these people didn't come at the right time. Fang still had 40 to 50 seconds left in his transformation, so he rushed straight up. The opponents raised their guns one after another. Fang's speed was not as fast as a bullet, but he could surpass their reaction speed. He jumped up and ran across the wall. The bullet could only hit the wall behind him. Then, he jumped into the crowd. Although these people were well trained, they were not much stronger than the group of people on the dock. The bloody massacre was one-sided. A minute later, a Harley-Davidson drove out of the parking lot with a rumbling roar, and it was not using a regular route. It went out directly from the fire exit. After a while, it accelerated and leaped over a distance of 6 meters from the flower platform next to it. In this case, even if the other party had any arrangement for the exit of the parking lot, it was completely in vain. The bike then quickly disappeared in the traffic flow. All this was fully recorded by the camera above, then it was projected into a black command vehicle 2 kilometers away. In front of the command vehicle screen, there was a man sitting in front. He had one eye, was burly, dressed in a suit and leather shoes, looked meticulous, combed his hair with wax, and even wore a bow tie. He was the executive director of Umbelia Asia, Wilson. Wilson looked at Fang's leaving figure and said slowly, "Very well, your combat power is far beyond our expectations." Having said that, he sneered. "It's just that, after learning that the biological weapon No. B didn't survive for 10 seconds, my authorization has been elevated to A+. This time, let's see if you can survive it." Having said that, Wilson pressed the intercom next to him and issued his own command. "Pay close attention to his whereabouts. Once he enters a sparsely populated area, immediately drop the purger. Fang's Harley-Davidson emitted a puff of green smoke, and it made a 90-degree turn and drove onto Yanjiang Avenue. It is secluded here, and the sky was already dark at this time. There were few vehicles on the road, and continuous patter of raindrops had fallen. Fang also had his own consideration of why he should go to places with few people because the enemies who attacked him before appeared in human form. If he went to places with many people, anyone could be his enemy, then he had to always be on guard. Was this a life for ordinary people? Therefore, Fang's choice cannot be said to be wrong. When he thought of this, he couldn't help but think of another person, a girl who looked very ordinary with glasses. He had an indescribable stabbing pain in his heart. Damn it, if it wasn't for Susina being assassinated in the previous world, with her mental power tentacles to discriminate between the enemy, how can I be so embarrassed? Fang didn't know at this time. His whereabouts were always locked by 2 satellites in the sky. Even the label on his collar was clearly visible. On the 2 satellites, there was an obvious dark red triangle logo. On the command vehicle more than 10 kilometers away, Wilson had already issued a command with a sneer. Yanjiang Avenue has been sealed off. There are only 17 active humans in the area. They are within a controllable range. Start the drone, destroy his vehicle, notify the field team, and initiate purger. There are many secrets hidden in this person, so try to keep him alive. Less than a minute after the order was issued, more than a dozen drones flew from a distance and shot directly at Fang. They all kept a distance of 50 meters away, and they used specially made thermite bullets. Each drone could shoot up to 14 times. Faced with such an attack, Fang seemed very passive. He couldn't strike back at all. At this time, his weakness in lack of long-range attacks was fully exposed. With just less than 20 seconds, his special-made Harley-Davidson had been ignited. He was forced into a drainage culvert next to him. The drones couldn't find an angle to shoot, so they could only hover outside in vain. This stalemate did not last for long. The sound of helicopter rotors could be heard from a distance. It could be seen that among the dark clouds on the horizon, there were 3 large Carney helicopters approaching in a triangle formation. Under each of the large helicopters, a huge black box with a length of more than 4 meters and a width of more than 2 meters was hung. After the helicopter cluster flew near Fang, it did not descend. Instead, it dropped the 3 large black boxes directly. After these 3 large black boxes were dropped from an altitude of several hundred meters, they hit the ground with a dull sound, but they did not break or deform. In the distant command vehicle, Wilson's cold and cruel voice sounded. Project Purger, initiate. Chapter 14, Horrible Biological Weapon. After he finished speaking, a holographic projection of a white little girl appeared next to him, and then a cold synthetic sound came out. The process of unlocking Purger starts. The temperature of the freezer is being increased. Injecting thawing liquid. Injecting citicoline, potassium aspartate, type 2 high-energy mixture, ACTH mixture. Implanting the characteristics of the target. Unlock sequence completes. This series of processes were complicated, but in fact, it was only a few seconds. Immediately after, a gas-leaking sound came from the edges of the 3 large black boxes, then a large amount of white mist spurted out. The cover of the box was opened automatically. On the edge of one of the boxes, a giant palm wearing a black glove suddenly stretched out and grabbed the edge of the box. The figure then stood up when exerting force on its palm. This was a giant man who was more than 2 meters tall. He had broad shoulders and a broad body. He was wearing a large black leather trench coat. His face was expressionless and scarred. He looked just like a person who had healed after a severe burn. The entire head of this giant man had no hair and was protected by thick white exoskeleton armor. It looked like a skull from a distance. The thickness of the bone armor was even more than 10 centimeters, which could block the mass fire of the 7.62 mm caliber rifle. Of course, this density of bone armor meant that the internal brain volume of the head was very small. It was only about the size of an apple. However, for this monster to be named Purger, in addition to the brain in the head, there were actually 2 large nerve ganglions in the armpits and groin. These 2 large tissues could share the load of the brain. Not only that, but the same was true of its heart. If it was dissected, there was only one blood red nodule pulsating in the heart, and there were more than a dozen similar nodules all over the body. The combined effect of the dozens of vascular cores was the original function of the heart. Even if more than half of Purger's vascular cores were destroyed, it could still possess extremely powerful combat effectiveness. After Purger stood up, a haze of blood appeared in its ears, nostrils, and mouth like boiling steam. Then, 2 red glows appeared in its pupils. On its retinas, Fang's photos and facial features were displayed. Then Pugger strode to the other black box and took out the contents one by one. The box was like an arsenal. Not only that, there was also heavy compound armor. This armor was obviously to counter Fang's extremely sharp claws. Its weight even reached more than 200 kilograms. Only a monster like Purger could wear such heavy armor and move freely. After dozens of seconds, Purger walked toward the culvert with heavy steps. Every time it took a step, it would leave deep footprints in the moist mud. Its speed seemed to be slow, but it was fast actually. When the Purger was 50 meters away from the culvert, it actually started to accelerate, launching a charge. 10 minutes later, Fang, who was covered in blood, was standing next to Purger's huge body. At this time, Purger's left hand was mutated into a bloody giant claw, and the shoulder of his right hand actually mutated into a basin-sized bloody eye. It didn't look completely like a human at all. But it was covered with wounds all over its body, and every wound so deep that bones were visible. A large amount of turbid thick blood flowed from it. Its bloody giant eye was also exploded, leaving a terrifying black hole. In order to kill this monster, his left head was torn off a large piece of scalp, which was extremely painful. His right arm broke at the elbow, revealing a pale broken bone stub. Only his left hand was relatively intact. Not only that, Fang's face was even more bloody. His face was being sprayed with smoke back in the hotel. This thing was actually mixed with a large number of parasite eggs, parasitizing directly under Fang's skin. The parasites secretly released an anesthetic fluid without the host knowing. As a result, at the most critical moment of the battle, these parasites suddenly broke out, almost knocking Fang out. His vision was also greatly affected. Everything he saw was blurry. However, even 2 of his hands were almost crippled, Fang still killed Pugger. Because his sharpest attack was not on the claws of his hands, but his legs. When Fang was fighting Purger, he used his killing move, which was second transformation. After his first transformation, he could choose to activate the Jacob's blood on his transformed body to perform second transformation. Then, he could completely transform into a cruel pure-blood giant wolf. Although his front claws were crippled, his hind legs with sharp claws and his terrifying fang could easily rip off the defense of Purger. However, Fang found desperately that this battle was not over at all, but it was just the beginning. Because the third black box that was thrown down from the helicopter had already started to spray pale white mist and opened slowly. At this time, what came out of it was a monster that resembled an octopus. It had 5 weird tentacles. The skin of the tentacles was more like a python, and thick black and red liquid was dripping from the tentacles. Probably after sensing Fang's gaze, the end of one of the tentacles cracked abruptly. It bloomed into a 3-petal mouth. Inside, it was densely packed with 6 centimeters barbs. It looked anomaly bloody. Purger Type 2, dispatched. Upon seeing this scene, Fang's pupils contracted, then he swallowed a medicine, turned around and fled. What's a joke, fighting with the previous Purger had almost exhausted all his energy, and there was another one now, why would he still fight? Escape was the best plan now. In fact, if it weren't for Umbrella's great interest in Fang, thinking that he was an excellent experimental material, so they wanted to capture him alive, it would be a small probability for Fang to kill this Pugger. At this time, in the command vehicle, Fang on the screen rushed to a truck that had been parked on the side of the road, then he suddenly started the engine. A consultant beside Wilson whispered. According to the detailed data we collected, he is now at the end of his mighty power. Our blood leeches have reproduced in his body for 37 minutes. The blood he shed has exceeded 3000 ml, which is close to 2/3 of the normal person's 4800 ml. Second, his injuries are enough for ordinary people to die 3 times. Chapter 15, Fang's head flew up. Wilson said blankly. So? The consultant said. My meaning is that we don't need to force him too tight now. Let him relax, then at most 10 minutes later, his injury will deteriorate to the point that he can't hold anymore and he will pass out directly. By then, it will be easy to catch him alive. Wilson nodded, then he said into the microphone in front. The drone enters the tracking mode. Don't attack for the time being. Temporarily deactivated Purger Type 2. Following Wilson's order, Fang succeeded in getting a breather. He was gasping for breath, his eyes were filled with bloodshot. But soon, Fang directly stepped on the accelerator pedal of the truck he was driving. Just after the truck accelerated to a certain level, Fang suddenly showed a grin on his face. He reached out and threw something out the window. This thing looked like a silver-white ball which was only the size of a ping-pong ball, but it exploded after flying out the window for a dozen meters. Typhoon Electromagnetic Oscillation Ball. Suddenly, the extremely fierce electromagnetic shock wave spread in all directions in an instant. All the electronic devices with a radius of nearly 20 square kilometers were greatly disrupted and crashed. There were many instruments that had been burnt due to overheating. The drones in the air were all out of control, spinning around like a fly without their heads, then they all exploded. Not only that, even the detectors on the satellite found that this area was completely immersed in a hazy atmosphere. This thing was a product of another world. It was completely a direct pressure of technology of another level. It was often used in interstellar warfare to cover and interfere with the opponent's fleet communications. Umbrella's science and technology tree was focused on the biochemistry field, so its technology in the electronic information field was limited. Therefore, facing Fang's electromagnetic oscillation ball, they couldn't do anything. Their losses in an instant were huge. Not to mention that the signal in the command vehicle was lost, even the mobile phone couldn't be reached. What's more terrible was that the internal control chip of the monster, Purger Type 2, was also burned and lost contact. It was equivalent to that the monster had no restrictions. It had fallen into a state of complete loss of control. It was directly dominated by instinct. If it gets enough flesh and blood, it will eventually grow into a monster that can destroy a city. Therefore, the focus of Umbrella's work must immediately shift to the Purger Type 2. Otherwise, once the incident became serious, the entire company would be in a very passive situation. If it attracts the attention of the national government, it will even be condemned by everyone. After all, they had not yet grown to the point of being able to confront the government. After using his trump card to trick the enemy, Fang then turned the steering wheel. The truck roared and directly smashed through the guardrail next to it, then it rushed into the surging river next to it together with a lot of debris, splashing a lot of waves. Before falling into the water, Fang opened the door in advance and jumped straight into the water. After he entered the water, he immediately activated his own voodoo, the soul of Fishman. The principle of this thing is to use his own essence and blood to supply the soul of Fishman, then he would obtain its blessing. This was also a typical black magic voodoo, that was, sacrifice first, then get the benefits later. Under normal conditions, Fang could use this voodoo very easily, but at this time, when he was almost dying, the flesh and blood essence absorbed by the soul of Fishman could really take his life. Fortunately, the soul of Fishman gave Fang the ability that he needed most at this time, that was, underwater breathing and swimming ability. Fang moved forward at high speed like a torpedo underwater, leaving a series of bubbles behind him. There was a black light lingering around his body. If someone witnessed it with their own eyes, they would be surprised to think that this was a fish, not a person. However, good times always pass too fast. The soul of Fishman's blessing time depended on how much flesh and blood one offered. According to Fang's current look of exhaustion, how much flesh and blood could he offer to the soul of Fishman? Therefore, 2 minutes later, Fang appeared and started looking for a place to land, but at this time, he saw that there was actually a cargo ship sailing slowly in the middle of the river. Fang was overjoyed seeing this. He knew the power of the Typhoon electromagnetic oscillation ball. It could at least ensure that the other party's communication couldn't be restored within 2 or 3 hours. At this time, after boarding the ship, he could not only recover from the injury, but he could also take the ship and leave at full speed. He could have it both ways. After jumping on the boat, Fang went straight to the cockpit and saw a middle-aged man playing with his mobile phone with his legs folded. He was shocked to see Fang, who looked ferocious, had broken one arm, and had crisscrossed wounds that became white due to soaking in water too long. As he was about to speak, Fang just knocked him out with his knee. Immediately afterward, Fang searched the boat briefly and found that there was no one else except the middle-aged man. He returned to the cockpit, adjusted the speed to the maximum, and drove in one direction. Because it was in autopilot mode at this time, Fang only needed to look at the distance occasionally to adjust his course. He then began to deal with his wounds. The key was the parasites on the face. It was very difficult to remove them as they had attached to his flesh. It greatly affected Fang's vision. But for Fang, this was not a particularly big deal, because this thing had been controlled. It wouldn't be fatal in the short term. As long as he could survive until the mission time limit. Then Fang began to search everywhere. What was he looking for? It turned out that after he entered the cockpit, he smelled a faint smell of coffee, and Fang also wanted to have a cup of hot coffee at this moment. So without much effort, he found an electric kettle, a packet of Nescafé instant coffee, and a coffee cup that had just been used not long ago. The aroma of coffee came from the cup, and there was more than half-boiled water in the electric kettle. Needless to say, Fang boiled the water and made himself a cup of hot coffee. But he still felt not satisfied because there was an empty wine bottle on the table next to him. So, Fang looked around and found 3 small bottles of Red Star Urquioto in the locked drawer, and there was a bag of cream sandwich bread on the shelf. It was normal for this thing to appear here because Fang knew that it was not normal for the crew to not bring strong alcohol due to the windy and cold weather on the boat, and the crew had to watch the night too. As for the bag of bread, it was also very common, it should be the snacks when the crew got hungry. So without discovering any doubts, Fang eagerly poured half a bottle of Red Star Urquioto and 3 bags of coffee made into the hot coffee, then he squeezed the cream from the butter bread into the coffee. This is a very popular way to drink in Fang's hometown, hot coffee with Irish whiskey, sugar and a thick layer of cream at the end. This drinking method was called brown bomber locally, which meant that after drinking it, it would give an explosive feeling in the throat. If you are hungry, you can serve it with a croissant with pickled cucumbers and bacon. After making this unorthodox brown bomber, Fang couldn't wait to take a big swig, feeling the sensation of hot coffee flowing through his throat. He seemed to be alive once again. Fang exhaled very comfortably. He fell to the chair next to him, closing his eyes and feeling the soreness from all over his body. This was the most powerful passive regeneration talent among his beast bloodline. As long as his head wasn't cut off or his body wasn't cut in half, this talent could stabilize the injury. It could even heal the injury bit by bit. The heavier the injury, the stronger the recoverability. At this time Fang was tired and hungry, and he was in a period of extreme weakness after his transformation, so he simply drank 2 cups of brown bomber and ate all the bread next to him. But after drinking for a while, Fang gradually felt extremely sleepy. He could barely keep his eyes open. Fang felt that something was wrong at this time. He repeatedly screamed in his mind that he couldn't sleep, but the tiredness couldn't be dispelled. It stayed in his mind and continued to influence his mind. In the end, Fang couldn't resist the intense sleepiness after all. He fell asleep. Snoring sounded loudly. This scene was already recorded by a hidden camera by the side and replayed on the screen on the other end. 10 minutes later, a thin figure appeared at the door of the cabin. It was no one else, but Fang Linian. What he held in his hand was a strange machine similar to a blower, and it looked heavy. It was a bit difficult for him to hold it. Then, Fang Linian slowly approached Fang, who was lying on the chair next to him, and turned on the switch. Suddenly, a 50 centimeters long grey flame appeared at the front of the machine. Fang Linian waved it down. Fang's head flew up directly. There were many coincidences in the world, but it definitely did not include the seriously injured Fang casually got on a boat, then fell asleep directly. He also happened to meet Fang Linian in the end. What was behind this was careful planning and a lot of investigation. Of course, there was still some luck. To clarify all these causal relationships, it must start from the beginning. Chapter 16, Planning. After Fang Linian realized that he had to kill Fang, he was considering one thing, that was, introducing foreign aid. Because he knew very well that relying on his own strength was absolutely impossible to do this alone. As for who the foreign aid was, of course, it was Fang's enemy. The organization that could easily dispatch luxury cars, Lincoln Navigators, that worth millions, crew with standard suits and firearms. Such a huge organization wouldn't be simple. Fang Linian found a number of black and red triangle logos unique to Umbrella from the videos and photos he had taken at the time. After checking the internet, it appeared clear to him. Then Fang Linian discovered that Umbrella was the world's largest biopharmaceutical company. Its business units included innovative drugs, healthcare, generic drugs, vaccines, animal health products, etc. It had 17 laboratories around the world and 62 factories. Even its security department was known as the world's 3rd largest security agency. Therefore, it was not difficult to infer that retrovirus sector injection was the latest research result of this huge company, and the handover on the dock was an internal behavior of the company to transport the injections from Europe to Asia. Fang outrageously murdered the crew and seized the goods, so the company definitely wanted him dead. There was an irresolvable contradiction between the two. Next, of course, was to determine where Fang was going. Fang Linian heard the deceased Gar revealing a very key message before, the B-level hidden missions item retrovirus sector injection. With it, they could get close to the president who had pancreatic cancer and got the tickets to Area 51. Fang Linian didn't know what hidden mission was, but he knew that, if this was the case, Fang, as the same kind of people as Gar, was of course not getting the retrovirus sector injection for himself. It was likely that he would take it to someone to complete the mission. As for the president suffering from pancreatic cancer, Fang Linian continued to check the internet, and he saw the news that the president of a high-tech company Landor traveled to the Thai city, the financial center of the Asia-Pacific region. Since this was the case, the president was in the local area, Fang would certainly not go too far and stay in the local area. Then, Fang Linian combined the fragments of clothes left by Fang and judged that his life was luxurious. Such a person would not have too many choices in terms of clothing, food, housing, and transportation, and the hotel he stayed in would certainly not be bad. Then the scope of searching for Fang could be further narrowed. He just had to search the system of the 5-star hotels and high-end restaurants in Thai city to find him. His characteristics were, black, with only 3 fingers on his left hand, and the clothes on his body were top handmade luxury goods. His identity might be a soldier, a baseball player. At this time, Fang Linian went directly to a certain website on the internet and found a shop page with the highest reputation, asking them to check the hotel check-in records that met the target characteristics in the last 10 days. Customer service: Xiao Li, dear, we need an ID number. Fang Linian, 400, the original starting price was 120. Customer service: Xiao Li, dear, this matter is difficult to handle. Fang Linian, 800. Customer service: Xiao Li, dear, it's really hard to do. Fang Linian, 1000, I will find another store if you don't do it. Customer service: Xiao Li, dear, can you repeat the request? 1500, we will accept the order if it's 1500. We will get back to you within an hour. Fang Linian, the order has been placed, please change the price. 40 minutes later, Fang Linian got the information of 4 suspected targets, but he quickly ruled out 2 of them. In the end, he added 800 yuan to get the camera data of the target when he checked in, then he successfully locked Fang check-in location. Lands Carlton 7 Stars Hotel. Fang's pseudonym was Von Damas, and his nationality was French. Therefore, after clarifying the cause and effect, Fang Linian went to the internet cafe, registered a new account, and then sent some conclusions he had made and the photos he had taken at the pier to Umbralia's official contact mailbox, indicating that he wasn't fooling around. Fang Linian believed that Umbralia wouldn't just swallow their anger, and their conflict with Fang was imperative. At this point, Fang Linian's first half of the plan had been completed. It was not difficult to find Fang and let Umbralia to have conflict with him. In fact, it didn't need any extra effort at all. Fang Linian's certainty in this was 90%. The most important thing was the second half of the plan. That was how to get the benefit from their conflict. Whether it was Umbralia or Fang, to Fang Linian, they were like a behemoth, they could crush him with just one finger. It would be difficult for Fang Linian to find a loophole and benefit from the conflict. Therefore, when planning the second half of the plan, Fang Linian believed that the most optimistic probability of success was only 40%. But for him, the 40% probability was already very satisfied, because the chance of curing advanced lung cancer was 1 in 10,000. One point must be clear, that Fang Linian did not predict the follow-up development of the situation when formulating the plan, and his fundamental purpose was definitely not to kill Fang, but to get the retrovirus sector injection. It seemed that only Fang had the retrovirus sector injection at this time, but don't forget the fundamental thing, that this injection was invented by Umbralia. They too had the retrovirus sector injection. Therefore, Fang Linian's original plan was to work on both sides. On one hand, he considered obtaining the retrovirus sector injection from Fang, but on the other hand, he considered getting the retrovirus sector injection from Umbralia more. In the first step of planning the second half of the plan, Fang Linian pledged the only relic left to him by Uncle Su, who raised him. What was this thing? It was a watch. When Uncle Su was at his most glorious time, he bet with a German expert. A part produced by a handmade car was exactly the same as the part processed by the highest precision lathe in Germany at that time. This proud German admitted his loss. He was convinced by Uncle Su very much, so the German took off his Chopard watch and gave it to him. Uncle Su did not sell this watch when he was at the most difficult time, because it was a witness to the most glorious moment in Uncle Su's life. However, Fang Linian was very short of money at this time, so he pledged this watch for 80,000 yuan. After receiving the 80,000 yuan, Fang Linian bought Fang's whereabouts in the most recent month and found that he had come to this city 7 days ago and start staying in the city. He had changed 4 hotels in 7 days, but Fang Linian found one thing in common, that was there were large rivers or sea near the 4 hotels. Thinking of Fang Linian's powerful swimming skills when he saw Fang went into the water to kill Gar at the time, Fang Linian could almost think that Fang prepared a trump card for himself, that was, escape into the water when necessary. Therefore, after investigating, he found another piece of good news, that was, the river near Lands-Carlton 7 Stars Hotel was not a waterway. Boats were prohibited to go deeper when it was about 3 kilometers from the city, so there were very few ships. Therefore, Fang Linian formulated Plan A, B and C. Chapter 17, 3 Plans. Plan A was that Fang Linian rent a cargo ship for 3 days with 30,000 yuan. He paid for the fuel himself. The price he offered was very good, so he rented it easily. Then Fang Linian went to hire someone who could sail and gave him 10,000 yuan for 3 days. He made a very strange request, that was, the cargo ship needed to travel slowly back and forth on the river near Lands-Carlton 7 Stars Hotel, then he had to drink a cup of hot coffee every hour. Of course, this person was a little surprised, but Fang Linian simply told him that asking 1 question would deduct 1,000 yuan, and 2 questions would deduct 3,000 yuan, so this person shut up honestly. Fang Linian further deducted that if Fang boarded the ship, he was likely to be injured. After losing blood due to injuries, he would feel cold all over. At the same time, after coming up from the water, he would want to drink something hot. During the previous investigation, Fang Linian even found the menu that Fang ordered. 2 of the 8 menus collected had a particularly high ordering rate. One was tomato braised beef brisket and the other was brown bomber. It was too deliberate to find tomato braised beef brisket in the captain's room of a cargo ship, but it was easy to get some cheap copy of the brown bomber materials. Then Fang Linian put the powerful psychedelic drug obtained illegally in the cream of the bread. This drug was harmless to the body. It had a strong calming and hypnotic effect which was beneficial to the injured person. So even if the person had supernatural abilities like the premonition of danger, they would not help. After finishing all this, Fang Linian himself was waiting on the shore. He had a surveillance camera here to see the situation in the cabin of the cargo ship at any time. He also rented a small motorboat which could allow him to get close at any time. Plan A was completed. It was worth mentioning that, in order to save money, Fang Linian installed the cheapest second-hand surveillance camera in the cargo ship. Its age was probably older than him and the technology was quite backward. It was disrupted too after Fang threw the Typhoon electromagnetic oscillation ball. However, after the electromagnetic shock wave passed through, it did not affect its normal operation, because the Typhoon electromagnetic oscillation ball only targeted those high-end chips, the encryption protocol. This camera had none of those. Plan B was relatively simple. Fang Linian also parked a rented Mitsubishi Pajero next to the river bank. This is one of the backup plan. If Fang was too late to dive or get caught on the shore, he could drive there to find him. In fact, this preparation did not come in handy from beginning to the end. Plan C. This was Fang Linian's main plan. He spent most energy and money into it. He secretly installed almost 30 simple cameras along the Shenzhong road. These cameras were all bought urgently from the city. They had their own storage function, and their own lithium battery could last for almost 2 days. The purpose of Fang Linian's doing this was because the 2 combat teams that Umbrella previously sent to hand over the goods had all been destroyed. The company knew that Fang was strong, so if they wanted to catch Fang, they would surely make a big move. It would be more powerful than the 2 previous teams, otherwise why would they still send it? Therefore, these cameras were very likely to capture Umbrella's unscrupulous and overbearing privacy. Not only Fang had the retrovirus sector injection that Fang Linian. After holding this evidence in his hand, he could use it to threaten this powerful company in exchange for the retrovirus sector injection. Of course, the consequences of threats must be serious, but could it be more serious than advanced cancer? Therefore, among the 3 plans A, B, and C set by Fang Linian, he believed that the highest success rate should be Plan C, which had a success rate of at least 25%. The lowest power was Plan B, which was less than 6%. As for Plan A, Fang Linian believed that too many coincidences were needed. There should be losses from both sides. At the same time, although the boats on the river weren't much, Fang didn't have to board a boat. He could just swim to the other side of the river and run away. Therefore, Fang Linjian only thought that the success rate was about 12%. The combined success rate of the three plans was about 43%. This was in line with Fang Linyan's previous expectations. However, what Fang Linyan did not expect was that what worked smoothly in the end was actually Plan A. The difficulty of Plan A was that Fang must be able to board the ship. Once he got on the boat, what awaited him was the trap Fang Linyan carefully laid out for his living habits. Once Fang fell for it, it would be difficult for him to get out. Finally, it was worth mentioning that the tool Fang Linyan used to behead Fang was the latest plasma cutter Multiplas 3500 he brought from the auto repair shop. It consisted of a plasma gun and a chassis, with a total weight of 9 kilograms. An electric arc was generated between the nozzle, anode, and the electrode, cathode, inside the gun to ionize the moisture between them, thereby achieving a plasma state. At this time, the ionized vapor was ejected from the nozzle in the form of a plasma beam under the strong pressure generated inside. Its temperature even exceeded 8,000 degrees. In the face of such a high temperature, even high-strength alloy steel vaporized in an instant. No matter how powerful Fang was, he would not survive if there wasn't any preparation. Fang's head flew high. Perhaps because the decapitation process was too rapid, the head could still open its eyes in the air. The headless body suddenly bounced up, and the hands and feet were struggling. It looked like a fish that was chopped off in the wet market. Not only that, after Fang's head banged on the floor, he bit the iron frame next to him in one bite. The iron sheet creaked under his bite, it was distorted to the extreme and was even torn apart. It could be seen that Fang was extremely unwilling. He couldn't accept the fact that he just died like that. Fortunately, Fang Linyan was prepared for a long time. After he beheaded Fang, he quickly stepped back, so he was not hurt. However, he was panting violently now. At this time, his vision even turned black, feeling prostration. He backed off 2 steps and leaned directly on the wall next to him. He could no longer hold the plasma cutter as well. It slipped from his hand and hit the floor with a thud. The result was certain. At this time, Fang Linyan felt extremely weak. His temples were jumping abruptly, and his legs were as soft as noodles. He took out his own oxygen breather and took a few mouthfuls of it, then he grabbed a bunch of medical glucose into his mouth. Only then he was relieved. At this time, after Fang died, his body gradually became transparent, then there were a large number of translucent light blue numbers of 0 and 1 jumping in it. Finally, they condensed into a peculiar bloody key. Chapter 18, Bloody Key. Fang Linyan wasn't surprised to see the bloody key because such a key had already appeared when he saw Fang beheading Gar and Sultan before. However, it was his first time seeing it in close contact. Fang didn't carry the injection with him. Fang Linyan felt a little disappointed, but he was certain that the key could not be made by the current technology, so maybe he could use it as a bargaining chip to exchange the injection with that damn company. With a nervous mood, Fang Linyan tried to touch the bloody key with his fingers. He found that this thing was surprisingly heavy. Not sure what it was made of. Looking closely, there were many strange and mysterious patterns on this 3 centimeters long bloody key. It seemed primitive, but after a few more glances, it gave a feeling that it should be from the future. Not only that, if one observed carefully for a while, there was even a peculiar door pattern on the top of the key. It had a metal texture and the color of flesh and blood. There were also some random sharp teeth on it. After holding the key, Fang Linyan suddenly had a message in his mind. Do you want to summon the number, DCS 187 Bloody Treasure Chest? Yes/no? Fang Linyan was startled, and he subconsciously chose no, then, of course, nothing happened. Fang Linyan hesitated for a moment, then he held the key tight again. This message reappeared in his mind. He chose yes this time, then he saw a bloody golden box gradually forming in front of him. There was a giant death scythe pattern on the surface of the bloody golden box. Immediately afterward, the metal box began to slowly open. There was a dazzling scarlet light in the box. He couldn't see what was in it. Fang Linyan immediately got a series of prompts in his mind, but he didn't notice that the screen of the antique phone he carried was also flickering non-stop. You opened the bloody treasure chest, you will get. Data is disordered. Attempt to repair now. Redundant data is being cleared, error byte is being corrected. Then, a long list of messages popped up. You can choose one of the following options as your trophy. 1. Obtain 50% of the remaining potential points and general points of the deceased before his death. 2. The deceased was killed in the real world, subject to the killer, so there is a 50% chance of obtaining a piece of equipment placed in the space by the character. Note, the equipment acquisition is a random selection. 3. Randomly obtain 3 items in the storage space of the character before death. 4. There is a 33% chance of obtaining the scroll of a certain ability of the character. This scroll draws one from all the abilities, including basic abilities, advanced basic abilities, and talent abilities, that the character has mastered. It becomes a scroll that can be learned by anyone. The ability level after learning the scroll is the original ability level /2. However, Fang Linian looked carefully and found that option 1 and option 4 were completely grayed out, that was to say, they could not be selected at all. So in fact, he could only have 2 options, 2 or 3. After realizing this, he decisively chose the third item. Because Fang Linian's purpose was very simple, that was to survive. The key to survival was the retrovirus sector injection that Fang carried with him. After choosing the third item, Fang Linian found that the bloody box in front of him began to fade and disappear. Finally, there were 3 things left on the deck. The first thing was actually a stack of banknotes. Fang Linian picked it up and took a closer look. He found that it was about 800 euros, and there were some dark red blood stains on these euros which seemed a little weird. The second thing was a very peculiar thing. It looked like a metal made of black iron. There was the abbreviation S.K.M on it, and there were also the texts "It can improve your military rank" on the back. Fang Linian researched for a while, but he didn't find any use for this thing. The third thing made Fang Linian exhale a long breath. It was the damaged silver white box. He immediately opened it and found that because the box was damaged, there were only 5 retrovirus sector injections remaining inside. When Fang Linian got what he wanted, he turned around decisively and left. Of course, the silver white box was thrown directly into the river. One was because it was too conspicuous and broken, and the other was because there might be some kind of tracking signal on it. He had already planned his retreat route. After getting ashore, he put on a helmet, rode a second-hand motorcycle, and drove straight to the inland. Of course, with Fang Linian's impeccable character, he had already carefully inspected this motorcycle and filled the petrol. This second-hand motorcycle rode on all the small roads such as county roads. When the Umbrella organization recovered from the chaos and began to investigate, Fang Linian had come to a mountainous area 100 kilometers away. The power here would even be cut off for about 8 to 10 days every month. The public security depended on dogs, transportation depended on legs, entertainment depended on hand. After coming here, Fang Linian was finally relieved. He came here completely full of random uncertainty. He encountered a fork on the road, so he directly used the draw lots method to determine whether to turn left or right. After drawing lots for 5 consecutive times, he came to this destination. What is the safest place? The safest place is where you don't even know you will go here. Then he plunged into a farmhouse. The boss here only cared about one thing, that was, the money one used to pay was real. Fang Linian easily got into his room. After reading the manual, he first took out the syringe, drew a half tube of blood, and mixed a retrovirus sector injection into the blood. After the transparent liquid came into contact with blood, it mutated directly. A large number of small black particles began to appear in it, and these small particles continued to emit smoke-like pattern. 5 minutes later, the small black particles gradually turned blood red, only then Fang Linian re-injected the tube of liquid into his body. Seeing this kind of liquid enter his body, Fang Linian had a strange feeling of becoming a white mouse. After an interval of 2 hours, Fang Linian determined that he did not have any adverse reactions in the instructions, then he started the first course of treatment. Within 48 hours, he injected 4 retrovirus sector injections into his body and drank water. To be precise, it was drinking a lot of water. This put his weak body on the verge of poisoning by drinking water. However, Fang Linian persisted very easily. After all, the discomfort caused by water poisoning was completely incomparable with the malignant pain caused by advanced cancer. After the injections, Fang Linian didn't feel anything unusual. He slept, ate, and occasionally strolled around. Of course, he would still cough. However, after injecting himself with retrovirus sector injections for 2 consecutive days, he began to feel some changes in his body. At least, the duration of the very bad cough had been significantly reduced, and his personal energy had obviously become exuberant. In fact, if he went to the hospital for an examination at this time, he would find that the cancer cells in the 4 lesions in his body had been successfully contained. They were no longer trying to spread, and their growth momentum had begun to slow down. The attending doctor would be surprised and called it a miracle. Chapter 19, Receiving Messages Again. Volume 2, Comeback. The Burning Gemini. Probably because of the frequent use of cocaine and Hercules super-nitrogen pump some time ago, Fang Linian's sleep had been poor. That night, he fell asleep at 10:30 p.m., but after waking up at 2 a.m., he couldn't fall asleep anymore. He could only get up and take a walk in the yard. The moonlight was like water. The green grapes under the grape racks were hanging down, looking like jade carvings. The night cicadas were singing, and the calls of crickets and grasshoppers in the vegetable garden were mixed together. The noise was full of life. There was a moist and fresh peasant atmosphere in the air, which made Fang Linian, who had suffered severe respiratory system damage, feel quite comfortable. He squinted his eyes slightly, planning his next move. After all, he now understood what a giant umbrella company was. The things he did were hard to be found by them, so obviously, a free port like Tai City was not suitable for staying anymore. Therefore, Fang Linian felt that his next destination should be the mainland, a place full of vitality and an unusually good public security environment. After making such a decision, Fang Linian picked up a glass of water, sighed helplessly, and drank the water with a frown. However, he suddenly heard a buzzing sound from somewhere. This sound made Fang Linian feel confused for a while. He was stunned for at least 2 seconds before recognizing the direction of the sound, then he turned around and walked into the room to find the source of the sound. At this moment, Fang Linian held his breath suddenly. After a while, he calmed down his emotions and took out the source of the sound from his travel bag. The mysterious antique phone. This thing didn't seem to need to be charged at all. It seemed that its battery was very sufficient. It was the text messages sent from this antique phone that allowed him to get the life-saving medicine. Although there were some minor misunderstandings in it. What kind of information did the vibration of the antique phone bring this time? The black plastic panel of the antique phone was wet with sweat. Fang Linian even had a slippery feeling. After he pressed the confirm button, the black and white screen also lit up. This time, there were another 3 new text messages. If you have carefully read the information I left before and did it with your heart, then you must be free from the pain of advanced cancer. But I have to remind you one thing, that is, the retrovirus sector injection you injected is modulated for pancreatic cancer. Yes, the purpose of its creation because the Umbrella organization wanted to threaten or buy Landor. Therefore, its effect on advanced lung cancer is not particularly good. It can only temporarily control your symptoms, just control only. 8 retrovirus sector injections can only extend your life for 2 months at most. Of course, it can also greatly improve your quality of life. Therefore, you need to do something new to extend your life. At 10:30 a.m. this Friday, head to the Kess Coffee on Baisheng Road No. 3, take the black wallet on the bar counter and drink a cup of coffee. Of course, old rule, you can't be early or late. Finally, good luck. Looking at these 3 new text messages, Fang Linian was silent. He carefully read the instruction above, then he focused on the phrase 8 retrovirus sector injections. This was a very clear little detail, that was, Fang Linian only got 5 retrovirus sector injections, so why did the message say 8? Could it be a typo or it was due to other reasons? The next information also made Fang Linian very annoyed. It is this kind of vague instructions again. Although he knew all the 3 major elements of time, place, and event, he didn't know what was really going to happen. This feeling of being kept in the dark really made Fang Linian very uncomfortable because he was a man with a strong desire to control. It was almost his instinct to pin everything firmly in his own hands. However, under the arrangement of this mysterious person, he could only face this very awkward situation. With a sigh, Fang Linian could only choose to face reality. After all, his current energy did not allow him to distract himself from thinking about other things. After searching the internet, Fang Linian found that his time was still very tight. Today was Wednesday, and the digital map showed that Baisheng Road No. 3 was almost 100 kilometers away from here. To be precise, its specific location was in a very famous internet celebrity's beauty spot. It was about 60 kilometers from the center of Tai City. So, Fang Linian looked at the sky, then said to himself faintly, "Is it time to go?" One day later, Fang Linian appeared on Baizheng Road number 3. At this time, he had already changed his face. He put on sunglasses, a standard full-body hoodie, a dozen of heavy metal pendants, and finally the big jeans. This made him look like a hip-hop young man. As for the accommodation, he rented a camping tent directly. The main feature of this attraction was camping to see the stars. He walked back and forth on this road 6 times. Because it was full of people, Fang Linian didn't attract anyone's attention. But he did not enter the cafe, because unlike the desolate pier before, there were people in the cafe. If he entered the cafe rashly, it might cause a chain reaction. This was what he absolutely did not want saw. Then, he just prepared and waited. In view of the previous lesson, Fang Linian got up from the tent he rented almost 3 hours in advance, then he took medicine and had breakfast. When he arrived on Baizheng Road number 3, it was only 7:30 am. This was obviously not the appropriate time to stroll on the street because it was too eye-catching. Therefore, Fang Linian could only return to the camping tent and sat in the tent in a daze. Chapter 20, Late Again. At the same time, in the open space 50 meters away, a tree leaf was falling due to gravity. The leaf landed right into the cradle by the side, covering the baby's face. The baby cried immediately. Seeing this scene, the baby's father, who had walked away because of smoking, hurriedly walked over and removed the leaf. After ensuring that the baby was okay, the baby's mother immediately scolded the father and told him to stay away from the baby when smoking. The father could only laugh bitterly at his wife's scolding. He found that there was not much cigarette left, so he simply walked a few steps toward the trash can here and threw the cigarette butt into it. It was worth mentioning that if such an incident didn't happen, the father would throw it into another trash can that was 20 meters away. After this small half of the cigarette was thrown into the trash can, it did not go out. Instead, it was still burning. After about 3 minutes, an old lady came over and threw a bag of trash into it, covering the cigarette that was about to go out. Then, the trash in the bag was ignited, but the fire was not big. There were a lot of wet things in the trash can too, so the flame could not be ignited. There was a faint green smoke coming out of the trash can immediately, then the wind blew this smoke to the open space that was 20 meters away. There were many camping tents in the open space. The tent closest to the trash can was empty. The second one was the one Fang Linian stayed in. The fire in the trash could probably only burn for about 3 minutes before it went out. No one noticed such an episode at all, even the cleaner who cleaned the trash cans was no exception because this kind of thing is so common. Sometimes, even the exterior of the trash can was burnt to black. This was just a small case in comparison to that. However, no one knew that the smoke from mixed trash lit by the cigarette butt actually contained a lot of nitrous oxide. This was a common inhalation anesthetic in clinical practice. Of course, Fang Linian in the tent couldn't feel all of this, but he yawned 2 minutes later and couldn't help leaning against the pillow next to him. Why am I getting tired? It's fine. I'll just take a rest. He thought so logically. However, after leaning on the pillow, he felt more sleepy. Fang Linian thought in his mind. It's fine. I'm just closing my eyes to rest. I definitely won't fall asleep. Something odd seems to be happening. Whatever, what am I going to put inside it? Then. Ahem, there was no then. He started to snoring slightly. This time, Fang Linian slept very sweetly. He vaguely had a sweet dream. He seemed to have completely recovered, until a thought came into his mind. Probably. It seems, maybe. I have something to do? At first, this idea was just lingering in his mind, but in the end, Fang Linian was shocked. Yes, what time is it? I have to rush over. This caused him to bounce off the bed at once. After rubbing his sleepy eyes, he saw that the pointer of the alarm clock was ruthlessly pointing at 10:25 am. Fang Linian realized that he was destined to be late again. At this time, he really felt that his mouth was full of bitter water, and he was even in an urgency of urination. He felt like his lower abdomen was going to explode. In a hurry, he simply stepped out of the tent and peed on the plant wall next to the tent. However, halfway though, the fat management auntie next to him had already shouted furiously. What are you doing? At this time, Fang Linian was really helpless. He pulled up his pants immediately, threw a 10 yuan bill amid the shout of the auntie and fled. Then, when he came to Baizheng Road number 3, he saw thick smoke rising from a distance. Fang Linian's heart suddenly had an ominous premonition. When he rushed to Base Hung Road No. 3 with an optimistic mentality, he already felt like his lungs were going to explode. He stuck out his tongue and gasped like a dog, but the scene in front had completely despaired him. Because there was no Kes coffee at all. At this time, it was 10:46 a.m. The location of Base Hung Road No. 3 was originally a small building, but now only most of the ruined walls remained. There was also a deep pit, releasing clouds of black smoke into the sky. In addition, there were several wounded people around, holding their heads and groaning. Blood was flowing from their ears. Probably, this was the reason why there were few onlookers around, otherwise, Fang Lingran didn't need to think about getting close. Looking at the scene before him, Fang Linian was also dumbfounded for a few seconds. However, he soon realized that he didn't actually have much choice because his advanced lung cancer was only temporarily controlled, not cured. Therefore, he could only make up his mind and muttered to himself, "It's better to be late than never." Then he pulled down the cap on his head to cover most of his face and rushed toward the scene of the explosion. When he approached, he smelled a burnt protein smell. As for the source of this smell, Fang Linian didn't dare to think about it. Then, he started looking for something anxiously in the ruins. Yes, which was the coffee and the black wallet in the instructions. Although this place didn't seem like a cafe here and he had been late for at least 10 minutes, Fang Linian decided to execute the instructions of the mysterious text messages to the end. Because he had tasted enough benefits before. After searching for more than 10 seconds anxiously, Fang Linian found an instant coffee machine nearby. Although this thing was slanted and buried mostly by the collapsed sand and stone, the faucet was still intact. Not only that, there were still several disposable paper cups scattered beside the coffee machine. Upon seeing this scene, Fang Linian immediately picked up a cup, then he rushed to the instant coffee machine, opened the faucet forcefully, and wanted to take a cup of coffee, but there was no liquid flowing out of it. In anger, Fang Linian kicked the instant coffee machine fiercely. But after kicking it, he noticed that the machine was tilted, then a collapse occurred, the whole machine unexpectedly in a rumble. At this time, Fang Linian realized that there was a basement here, but the entrance to the basement was buried by the previous landslide. His foot happened to trigger a chain reaction, exposing the stairs to the entrance of the basement.